And Rolling Stones or Strolling Bones? Mick Jagger at 80 today, proving you can always get what you want. As a wrinkly rocker, at least. First, the latest headlines with the ever-youthful Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. Our top story, and the former CEO of NatWest is no longer a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. A government spokesperson also confirms that Dame Alison Rose has resigned from her roles as co-chair of the Energy Efficiency Task Force and as a member of the Net Zero Council after being asked to step down by the Secretary of State. It's after Miss Rose admitted she discussed Nigel Farage's relationship with the bank Coutts to a BBC journalist. Well, speaking to us here at GBNews, Nigel Farage says that Dame Alison's resignation had to happen.
Didn't think she could last beyond the end of the week. We have on Friday the half-yearly figures coming. There is an investor meeting at 9:30 that morning. So she's gone, and that's a start. It was the board that sanctioned this culture, a culture that talks about diversity and inclusion and actually is very divisive. And in my case, as you could clearly see, pretty poisonous stuff. I think any board member that endorsed that statement last night, where they said we breach confidentiality, but she can stay in her post. Frankly, I think the whole board needs to go.
Well, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, told us it's important that customers have trust in their banks.
It's very important that customers can have trust in their bank, that they're not going to have their services withdrawn because of their political views or something within the law that they have said. That's what I reiterated to all of the UK's bank and building society bosses at a meeting this morning that we've just had. And it's why the government is bringing forward changes to the regulations to make that even clearer, to mean that customers do have to get a reason, have longer to look at other arrangements and have greater opportunity to challenge that.
In other news this afternoon, wildfires circling the Mediterranean have claimed the lives of more than 40 people. 3 people have died in Greece, with temperatures there today set to exceed 44 degrees Celsius. 34 people have died in Algeria, and a number of fatalities have been recorded in Italy, including 3 dead in Sicily, as wildfires and a storm hits the country. Blazes have also broken out in Portugal, Syria, Gran Canaria, southern France and Tunisia. Meteorologist Jim Dale told us that the high temperatures are not going down anytime soon.
The world's hotting up, and it does include the Mediterranean, and this kind of thing that you've seen in the photographs here, in the video, this is going to continue. There is slightly cooler air, I say cooler, less hot air moving through the middle of the Mediterranean. So Italy, Sicily, Spain, these sort of places, a little bit of a relief, but not for Turkey, not for Greece. I think it will continue in the oven.
Junior doctors in England have announced a 4-day walkout next month in a dispute over pay. The strikes are taking place from the 11th to the 15th of August in what's being described as the next round of monthly strike action from the BMA. The union says it is not for the Prime Minister to decide that negotiations are over before he has even stepped in the room, and the dispute will only end at the negotiating table. The Prime Minister will give evidence at the infected blood inquiry today. Rishi Sunak will be questioned on the government's response to the use of infected blood and blood products after thousands of patients developed HIV and hepatitis C through contaminated products in the 70s and 80s. Well, protests are expected this afternoon calling for full compensation payments to those affected. A victim of the scandal, Richard Warwick, told us the effects of it are still here today.
The fact that we lost so many people, especially those that died in the late teens, early 20s, it brought it home to us of how widespread these infections were, particularly amongst the haemophilia community. It wiped out the whole generation of young lads, young teenagers with haemophilia during the late 80s and early 90s. It's really decimated our community.
The owner of Tottenham Hotspur has been charged over an alleged insider trading scheme. 86-year-old British billionaire Joe Lewis is accused of abusing his access to corporate boardrooms and providing inside information to others, who then allegedly made millions of dollars in the stock market. A Tottenham club spokesperson says it's a legal matter unconnected with the club. This is GB News. We will, of course, bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Mark and Pip.
Rory, thanks very much and welcome back to the live desk. With the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, now adding his voice to the de-banking debate, stating that NatWest got this one wrong. Well, Nigel Farage calling for a cultural change within the banking industry after NatWest boss Dame Alison Rose dramatically stood down in the early hours of this morning.
Despite NatWest board saying just yesterday evening that it had full confidence in Dame Alison, she stood down after Downing Street indicated it has significant concerns about the bank's handling of Mr Farage's account with its subsidiary Coutts. Well, NatWest shares fell by more than 3% at one stage earlier today.
Let's go live now to NatWest HQ and speak to our political reporter, Catherine Forster. And Catherine, an indication from Nigel Farage that he wants now the whole board to consider its consideration, and also calling for a cultural change across the banking sector.
Yes, that's right. Nigel Farage accepted the apology from the BBC business editor Simon Jack a day or so ago. Then, of course, we had Dame Alison Rose's statement last night. At that point, it looked like she was going to cling on, but it became very clear, it was made clear from Number 10 and the Chancellor of the Exchequer that they were unhappy with that. And then, of course, she ended up resigning at about 1:45 a.m. But that most certainly will not be the end of it, because Nigel Farage has already said he thinks it's inexcusable that the board last night, when she'd admitted to a serious error of judgment, essentially leaking information that she should not have given to a BBC journalist, that was okay and that they would stand by her. So he is calling now for the whole board of NatWest to stand down. And of course, NatWest is 39% owned by us, the taxpayer. The government bailed them out to the tune of some £20 billion during the financial crisis. So obviously, for them to be removing people's bank accounts, in this case Coutts, which is owned by NatWest, it is accepted pretty much across the board as being unacceptable. And this morning, the City Minister, Andrew Griffiths, has been meeting with banking bosses. It does seem very clear that the government are going to take action on this. We've heard now that thousands of people have had their bank accounts closed or struggled to get them. We had Policing Minister Chris Philp on GBNews this morning saying that he had personally struggled to get a bank account and that many, many MPs do. And Andrew Griffiths have said, I hope the whole financial sector learns from this incident. Their role is to serve customers well and fairly, not to tell them what or how to think. So this is not just a story about Nigel Farage and Coutts, important though that is. Banking shares have fallen across the sector. NatWest down about 3%, but also Lloyds, Barclays down too. I think there is a realisation now that there is a real issue here, and it's likely that legislation will follow. We will wait to see what happens now, but certainly, far from being the end of the story, I suspect this is very much still the beginning.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
I was going to say, it's controversial, just the Treasury readout of that meeting just coming through, with Andrew Griffiths starting to reiterate the government's clear position on the importance of legal freedom of expression. But despite what Sir Keir Starmer said, we got Nick Thomas-Simons, the Shadow Trade Secretary, saying, look, this should actually be a matter for the banks themselves, not for the government, and what he has sort of indicated is political pressure.
Yes, that's very true. Keir Starmer has said, yes, of course, this is unacceptable, but Nick Thomas-Simons making the point, really, that it should be a matter for the bank, and also pointing out that the government had acted, apologies for the pneumatic drill going on behind me, that the government had acted incredibly quickly on this, but not so quickly when it came to Nadeem Zahawi, Dominic Raab, who we remember ultimately had to go, but after many, many weeks. So saying, well, you know, it's okay saying standards in public life and all that, perhaps you should put your own house in order. So not a unanimous judgment, but certainly I haven't spoken to anybody here who doesn't think that Dame Alison Rose was right to stand down.
And Catherine, experts are predicting that the regulatory fallout of this is going to continue for many more months.
Yes, and that's why I think there is a nervousness now across the banking sector. Not that they didn't see this coming, because this story has been rumbling on for a couple of weeks, and Downing Street and politicians have been making disapproving noises for some time, but they're certainly being asked to take a very close look at themselves and be able to justify, and they say apparently in this meeting there was an agreement that people certainly shouldn't be having bank accounts closed because of what they think or what they've tweeted. For instance, in the evidence that Nigel Farage got, there were things like the fact that he had retweeted Ricky Gervais making a comment about trans people, that he was friends with Novak Djokovic, who's anti-vax, you know, making a very clear judgment on what Coote thought was politically acceptable or not. But of course, the bank's job is to serve their customers, not to be some sort of morality police.
For the moment, Catherine, thank you. We'll let you go off and shout at the drill operator behind you, but thanks for bearing with it. But let's reflect now on what Conservative MP David Davis told GB News earlier. This is what he had to say to us.
This has been going on for some time, and Nigel's done a service, really, to the whole country in dragging it into the public domain. Because what's happening here is you have these people, these senior bank managers. They are essentially bureaucrats. They're not really wealth creators. They are people who administer things, administer things on behalf of the taxpayer, and they are using their positions to exercise their own views, their own prejudices, to other people's disadvantage, and that's absolutely wrong.
Well, joining us now is the former Chief Executive of the British Bankers Association, Angela Knight. Good afternoon to you. Thank you for coming in and talking to us. I'm sure this is an exceptionally busy day.
And colour coordinating as well.
Well, isn't that fantastic?
Well done.
Isn't that fantastic?
Is the future of the banking industry going to change now in light of all this? Because this isn't just about one man and his bank, is it? Like some people are saying. I've seen a lot of that on social media. It runs far deeper than that.
It does run far deeper, but I do think we also need to be quite careful and not think that this is something that happens right across the banking industry, because it doesn't. And there's a number of parts that play into this. I mean, the first is there are legal requirements on banks to do checks for fraud and all sorts of things like that, which a lot of people complain about because they say, well, you know, why have I got to explain my transaction? And I've noticed that is sort of getting muddled up in this. And then there's this second criterion, one does need to pay attention to it, called the political exposed persons criteria.
PEP, as it's known.
Exactly, and I'm one. Now, when you think I lost my seat in 1997, how on earth am I still a politically exposed person? It isn't the banks you need to blame for that. There is legislation and regulation that sits behind this. And whilst there's sort of certain criteria, you know, about doing extra checks and so on, we started to hear from politicians who said that this has affected their children opening a bank account, and that seems to me that somehow in this country we've taken things too far. And then there's the third piece, and that is the overlay, which in this particular instance, Coote seems to have placed. And that overlay is something about, do we think this particular person, because of what they say and how outspoken they are, somehow impacts our reputation?
Reputational damage.
Exactly. And that, I think, is the real part of this whole thing where there's a big
so
question
is there
mark.
a danger that as a result of this, those things could even be exacerbated, that the banks try too hard? Because clearly Labour, Nick Thomas-Simons, the Shadow Trade Secretary, said, look, this should be a matter for these commercial concerns for the banks, not for government. If the government tries to impose yet more things can go wrong.
Yes, because a lot of this has, directly or indirectly, come from either legislation which we've passed, and if I may say, one of the benefits benefits of this is it kind of has woken up, I think, the political classes to what legislation they have approved, you know. And then the second piece comes from regulation, because you can't put to one side the fact that regulators are coming into banks and other financial institutions and saying, OK, so what are your policies on, for example, environmental and social inclusion? What are your values? Now, all of that is a good thing, but if you've got regulation pushing on one side and you've got law pushing on another, there will be areas where a decision is made which, as in this instance, puts you the wrong side of the line.
Right, so who should be the arbiter then? Should it be the board of the bank? Should it be the financial ombudsman? Or should it be the Financial Conduct Authority? Because it does seem that part of this, it's all fallen between the stools, if you like.
Well, at the moment, the decision for anything, as far as any public company is concerned, is, of course, that of the boards. Because the board has to say, right, here's the law, here's the regulation, this is how we wish to conduct ourselves. And can I say at this point that there's been a huge sea change in the whole culture inside banks, and for the better. And we do see that in the way that they deal with their customers. And we also see it in the way that some of the things people complain about, like, for example, why did I have to justify that transaction? I was only paying a pound, but that is fraud.
Sorry to interrupt. So when Nigel Farage asked for a cultural change, you think that may already have happened?
Oh, I think a lot of change has taken place within the banks. There's absolutely no denying that at all. He might want some more. And after all, if I was in Nigel Farage's shoes and it was me, you know, and I was prepared to be outspoken, because don't forget, a lot of people are not prepared to be outspoken. If I was being outspoken, I'd want to shoot everybody in sight and decapitate, you know, the entirety of the board. We need to be realistic about this, because there are certainly areas in which a bank has a legitimate right to say, we're no longer dealing with you. And also, there are some cases where they can't actually tell you that in any straight language. Anything to do with fraud or suspected fraud, you will be denied your bank account, and you won't be told, because the criminal authorities will need to investigate. And then we do have situations in which people go into bank branches and they are just awful. They shout and they roar at the staff. And
Not that we're indicating Mr Farage would have done that, of course. No.
It specifically said in that Coutts document that he was always polite. People are not always polite. And if you've got somebody that's being really, you know, foul to your own people, you can get rid of them. Equally, there is a right in this country for people to have at least a basic bank account. And in the instance with Nigel, well, he'll tell you more than me, but as I understand it, Coutts said no longer for us, but you can have a bank account with NatWest.
Yeah, for a personal account, not the business account, which I think was part of the difficulty.
There will be some intricacies in there. But you don't, in this country, we do not deny people a basic bank account unless they are a fraudster or unless they are on one of these international blacklists.
You mentioned about decapitating the rest of the board, which was an interesting way to describe it. Of course, Nigel Farage...
Metaphorically,
of course, but Nigel Farage is calling for them all to go. Does he not have a point in the sense that Dame Alison Rose is boss, or was boss, of NatWest? She wasn't over Coutts, and Nigel's bank account was with Coutts. So do the questions not go deeper than just... Does it not go beyond just Dame Alison Rose?
Yes, I think the questions do go deeper, but as to whether somebody else has to resign or not, that I'm very much uncertain on that. I think that it's very easy to call for resignations without, you know, standing back and having a think. And the reason here, as I understand it, or certainly where I was yesterday evening, put it that way, with her resignation, well, what led up to the resignation, was, yes, something had happened at Coutts, but it was what she said at that particular dinner, and there is something about confidentiality which is very important. We do have two issues playing here. Why and under what circumstances can a bank say to somebody, we no longer wish to bank you? And then we've got a second set of circumstances which sit around confidentiality. Now, both have come together in this instance, but we need to be careful not to muddle the two.
Angela, former chief executive of the British Bankers Association, and boy, I bet you're glad you're still not in that post at the moment. Thank you very much for coming in.
I did it for 5 years.
Indeed, more than enough. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
A state of emergency has been declared for the entire island of Rhodes as fires continue to rage out of control on the Greek holiday destination.
Well, the authorities are now warning of 6 new regions in Greece too facing extreme danger from the wildfires. And in the past 24 hours, the firefighters have been tackling at least 53 outbreaks on Rhodes alone, thousands being evacuated there from homes and hotels.
And now emergency teams in Portugal have been tackling wildfires in a mountainous area west of the capital, Lisbon. The risk alert has also been raised to extreme for Mallorca, adding to the challenges for tour operators and holiday companies.
Well, let's head back to Rhodes now, because our reporter Paul Hawkins sent us this update from that island.
Between Vati, 2 villages in the south of the island, just to give you an idea of the challenge that firefighters are facing, and they have beaten the flames back island, and we have passed on the drive down here scorched earth on the way down here. We've seen burnt out buildings, burnt out cars, some buildings left completely alone. It is arbitrary fire, and to give you an idea of the nature of fire, have a minutes we came along this road and there was no fire at all, and it was just smouldering, and it seemed like the firefighters had won the battle. But in the last few minutes, the fire reignites, and back thick over the hill, it smells unbelievably strong. There's ash falling on top of us, and the fire down the hill. And the police officer, just in the distance, you can see there's emergency services. If we have a look over here, I can see one proper fire truck, I can see a couple of volunteer firefighter vehicles as well, and there's 3 police officers there talking on a motorbike. The officer's standing up, telling me that in the next few minutes he might have to tell us to move on in case this really reignites, comes down the hill, takes out the power lines as well, which we have seen taken down by the fire, and in some places they are still trying to fix those power lines, but it's a thankless task clearly when the flames continue to reignite. And this is the kind of challenge that the firefighters are facing, and full credit to the volunteer firefighters as well, who are supporting the official ones as well. So the police officers here moving us on. Do you want us to move on now?
Yes.
Now? Okay.
Yes,
all right, we're being...
Okay?
Yep, we're being asked to move on now because the fire is getting thicker and it's coming down the valley, so we're going to leave it there. But that gives you an idea of the challenges that the firefighters on Rhodes are facing at the moment. It's only a small part of the island, but it's a big challenge.
But now the entire island in a state of emergency. Paul quite clearly getting to a place of safety there, but he then has headed elsewhere to update us. So let's join him now live back on Rhodes. Paul, where are you now and what can you see?
I'll tell you what, Mark, I'm back in exactly the same spot that I was in. I know you just said that I've moved off, and in fact, we were just about to speak to the equivalent of the kind of Greek emergency response unit. Chap was about to speak to me, and he's now sped off in that red vehicle because a guy pulled up, shouted something to him, and they just jumped in that red truck and they've sped away. We're in the spot where we were earlier, just over there. That's where you saw me giving that report just now. We just pulled up at the start of that fire, which was on that bank. If you have a look up at the bank now, that's what it looks like now. So they've successfully extinguished it. There are a few flames just over those peaks, which you can't see at the moment. But essentially, the point of telling you this, and there is a state of emergency on the island, it is only a small part of the island that's not covered. It's remarkable. If you go to the north, you wouldn't even know there were wildfires happening. And in other resorts on the island, you wouldn't think that there is anything like this going on. Come to the south, the very south, which is where we are now. This is what the authorities are having to deal with. You think the fire's out, and then it only takes one small ember to reignite it, and then they rush back here. They're having to remove trees. In this part of the world, the power lines are still standing up, but as we've driven here, we've seen power lines have fallen down, and indeed we've found out for ourselves firsthand that the area doesn't have any power. There's no water either, and they're only taking cash payments. So that's why we're a little late coming to report to you, because we had to drive out to then go and fetch some water and then bring it back here. So it's really difficult for the people in this area at the moment. In this immediate locality, the tourists have gone, the businesses have gone. As one of the volunteers said to me, we love the tourists, we want the tourists to come back, but right now our priority is the people who live here and their businesses. This will take years to recover, and then we want the tourists to come back. So it's really difficult at the moment, and I cannot tell you how much admiration I have for the volunteers here that have their day jobs, and if they're not doing their day jobs, they are here doing 20 sort of hour days, very little sleep, very little water, to simply try and support the overstretched fire services.
Yeah, and Paul, tourists have been telling us, haven't they, all week about how brilliant local people have been towards them. And we also shouldn't forget all the wildlife that are dying. I mean, some awful pictures of firefighters, you know, carrying animals to safety, other animals that have lost their lives. I mean, it's absolutely devastating. I know you say it's only on a small part of the island, but for the people that live there, for the resorts involved, it's terrible.
Yeah, it really is. And it's funny you touch on the animals bit, because yesterday I was talking to a Greek volunteer who's working with the animal shelter on the island, and they've been effectively packaging up food and water and then dropping them in the areas like, if we just have a peer between these trees, you can see now over the hill, yes, there are still fires raging, but a lot of this part of the island looks like that, and there are still some animals roaming, and obviously they haven't got anything to eat. So what the volunteers are doing in the shelter is dropping packages and leaving them there for the animals, and also rescuing animals and taking them back as well. And indeed, some locals on the island have also been temporarily housing those animals. So there's a huge emergency effort. It's a real community feel as they try to not only save businesses, homes, lives, livelihoods, repatriate tourists, relocate tourists, but also the animals on the island as well.
Very quickly, Paul, just to stay on a positive note, it looks as if the wind has dropped, which is going to be vital.
Yeah, it has. Just bear with me, Mark, because there's another fire truck coming through. It's like this all the time around here. In this part of the world, these fire trucks, they suddenly get a call and then they're off to another fire. You might have to move out of the way, Joe. Sorry, our cameraman's going to have to move out of the way here. Yeah, there is some bit of positivity. The wind has dropped today and the temperatures are forecast to drop to the sort of low to mid-30s, which is good. But the problem is, it doesn't take away the fact that this place is still a tinderbox. Even in the low 30s, it's not like the ground's suddenly going to be more moist or it's not going to be any less flammable. So even though the temperatures are dropping, that threat still exists. And as one of the volunteers said to me, the wind can suddenly pick up in this part of the world very quickly.
Paul, thank you very much for updating us there with those firefighting teams. We'll be back to you, of course, throughout the programme. Thanks very much indeed.
The Prime Minister will give evidence at the infected blood inquiry this afternoon, with families calling for full compensation after being offered only interim payments so far of up to £100,000.
That inquiry set back in 2017 to look into how thousands of patients in the UK developed HIV and hepatitis C after being given contaminated blood back in the 1970s and 80s. Almost 3,000 people have died since then in what's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS.
Sue Threecall is the widow of one of the victims. She thinks the government has been sidelining the compensation process for years.
I hope that Mr Sunak is thoroughly grilled by Jenny Richards, a barrister, and by Sir Brian Langstaff, who is running the inquiry. I hope that he's completely put on the spot, and that finally we might get some answers. I mean, it depends on how well he's been briefed, because to date his memory doesn't seem to be very good about the scandal at all. But you have to bear in mind that this is only one of many prime ministers that we've dealt with over the years. I started campaigning in 1985, before my husband died in 1991. And we have, as a group of campaigners, we have dealt with every Prime Minister, every successive government of every colour ever since.
Let's get more from our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Good afternoon to you, Tom. You're outside the inquiry. Now, Rishi Sunak has already called the blood scandal, the contaminated blood scandal, a tragic injustice. And he promised to provide certainty to survivors, yet he still hasn't done that, has he?
He hasn't, and if there's one word that the protesters here today are asking for, are urging the government for, it's certainty, it's compensation. For them, it's a race against time because of the thousands of people who were wrongly infected with poisonous products from the NHS over that 20-year period from 1970 through actually up to 1991. Those victims of this scandal are running out of time in many cases. Some have died in recent weeks before this hearing today, and the victims here are urging the government to act far faster than the current timetable. The government is saying at the moment it will not respond to any report until this report is fully completed by the inquiry, and we're not expecting that until late autumn. After then, there will have to be processes set up to distribute whatever compensation is agreed, and that is a lengthy process. So the protesters here today, the victims and their families, are urging the government to act with more urgency and more speed, because frankly, for some of those who were infected by NHS products over that 21-year period, for some of them, it's getting too late.
And indications there, of course, about the strength of feeling with those gathering outside there, Tom. The Prime Minister, of course, due there at 2 o'clock. We'll head back to you a little later to get a catch-up on that. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, why police say that they have lost their way having to deal with mental health issues. What will they be doing now? We'll be updating on that. But first, headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much. The former CEO of NatWest is no longer a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. A government spokesperson also confirms that Dame Alison Rose has resigned from her roles as co-chair of the Energy Efficiency Task Force and as a member of the Net Zero Council after being asked to step down by the Secretary of State. It's after Miss Rose admitted she discussed Nigel Farage's relationship with the bank Coutts to a BBC journalist. Well, speaking to us here at GB News, Nigel Farage says that Dame Alison's resignation had to happen.
I didn't think she could last beyond the end of the week. We have on Friday the half-yearly figures coming. There is an investor meeting at 9:30 that morning. So she's gone, and that's a start. It was the board that sanctioned this culture, a culture that talks about diversity and inclusion and actually is very divisive. And in my case, as you could clearly see, pretty poisonous stuff. I think any board member that endorsed that statement last night, where they said we breached confidentiality, but she can stay in her post, frankly, I think the whole board needs to go.
Wildfires circling the Mediterranean have claimed the lives of more than 40 people. 3 people have died in Greece, with temperatures there today set to exceed 44 degrees Celsius. 34 people have died in Algeria, and a number of fatalities have been recorded in Italy. That includes 3 dead in Sicily, as wildfires and a storm hits the country. Blazes have also broken out in Portugal, Syria, Gran Canaria, southern France and Tunisia. A consultation on ticket office closures, which was due to end today, has been extended to September the 1st. Train operators unveiled proposals earlier this month for mass closures of station ticket offices after the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, urged them to cut costs. The plans have received criticism from groups representing passengers and the RMT. That's you up to date, but you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website. That is gbnews.com.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's a complete breakdown.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. Now, the government's announced a new policy that could free up to 1 million hours of police time. They say new arrangements would take mental health calls away from police forces unless there was a clear threat to safety or risk of a crime being committed.
Some forces attend up to 80% of health and social care calls, and that is a figure the government wants to get down to 30% in 2 years. Well, mental health charities are concerned as demand for mental health support continues to grow.
Well, let's speak now to Dr. Lada Smith, President of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Is the social or health sector in a fit state to take on this extra burden?
Well, that's a really good question. The reality is that over the past few years, despite us treating and seeing more people than we've ever done before, with, unfortunately, fewer staff than we've ever had before. We have, in some places, up to 20% vacancies. And we're doing well. You know, our suicide rates are down. Unfortunately, what we don't have are enough resources to take up the shortfall that will be created by the police not being involved in some of the support for people when they're in the mental health crisis and they're at their most vulnerable. It's going to be extremely difficult if the police take unilateral action.
OK, and given what you've just said, is the difficulty also that it's a call handler who has to decide whether this is something that can be handled by a health professional or whether indeed there is a risk factor where the police need to attend?
Now, that's going to be a really difficult call because, as we know, anyone can experience mental illness. And it's difficult to know sometimes when someone is deteriorating to the point of crisis. And it can look one day as though someone's not doing too badly, but the next, a few hours later, things have really gone awry. And we'd be really concerned that actually making that call, which is what police officers do all the time, remember, and they have some training in this and not always sure. And when they're not sure, they will, bear in mind, they are the only agency that has the legal power to convey someone from a place, from a public place or even their home to a place of safety. And if they're worried, what they will do is that they will think, I think this person, there is something going on that's not quite right. They'll take that person to the local emergency department, and that person can get seen by a mental health professional, and that's right and fitting. The police, understandably, are really concerned about the time it takes to hand that person over. But the fact is that because that's a legal power that they have, it has to be done safely and properly, and that person has to be handed over to approved mental health professionals. And frankly, the approved mental health professionals are not sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They are really, really busy running around trying to find beds. And at this moment in time, we don't have enough of them. We are working at 99 to 100% capacity, and we are trying our hardest with the money that we've been given to develop our community services, but they won't come on stream for quite a long time, some years. Right now, in the next few months and next couple of years, we need a few more beds, and that's going to need additional resource.
The government is saying that it will introduce specialist mental health ambulances to replace police officers, and also extra capacity for treating patients, and crises cafes where people struggling to cope can go for help. Will that make a difference? How helpful is that?
Well, those things would make a difference as long as they're able to be instituted. What we're not hearing from the government is that there's going to be additional funding that's going to allow those crisis cafes and those mental health ambulances to actually happen. What we're understanding is that the money that's going to be the money that has to pay for these things is coming out of existing resources. And as I said, we are already completely stretched beyond our limits, just like our police colleagues.
Dr. Smith, President of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, thanks very much for joining us here on GB News. Thank you for your time. Now, let's bring you a story about a major advertising body that's allegedly been receiving funding from an investment firm linked to Russian oligarchs and even controversial South American mining operations. Well, our GB News Investigates reporter Charlie Peters is in the studio with more for us.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon to you, Charlie. It sounds like there's a lot to this.
So it's a group called the Conscious Advertising Network. It's a coalition that describes itself as an ethical attempt to break the economic link between advertising and what it describes as harmful content. It has 7 manifestos that it issues to brands and advertising agencies to achieve that ambition. Those range from guidance on hate speech and to environmentalism. But we found in our investigation that the investment firm that props up this organisation, Quadrature Capital, has significant holdings in firms which you might say are linked to some of the harmful content that they rail against in their campaigning. So the first one that we've looked into is a firm called Ozon Holdings. It's a Russian e-commerce platform. Quadrature has $100,000 worth of shares in this firm, which is headed by a Russian oligarch called Alexander Alexandrovich Shulgin. Now, this man is so senior in the Russian state and its apparatchiks that he was in the famous February 24th meeting last year when they decided to invade Ukraine. So linked with this firm, which is under UK sanction, Mr. Shulgin is under an asset freeze and a travel ban by the Foreign Office. But it goes on. I mean, this firm also has $3 million in Pan-American silver, which is facing mass protests in South America due to its environmental impacts there, and $10 million in Newman Corporation. 2016, its Peruvian subsidy was also found to have been involved in some alleged human rights abuses. So a very delicate situation for the Conscious Advertising Network and its ambitions now.
Yeah, and in terms of what you found, what are you doing with that information?
Well, we took it to them, and they gave us a statement. I believe their research director, Marsha Jackson, got back to us to say that, well, first they thanked us for raising the information. And said they weren't aware. And they said, that their relationship is with the Climate Foundation that Quadrature funds, but they take money from the same organisation, this Climate Foundation they're with. And Marsha Jackson went on to discuss how they were reviewing their relationship with Quadrature Capital and that they would be looking into how they take money from them in the future. This comes from reporting last month in The Guardian that the Quadrature Climate Foundation was receiving funding from this firm that had money in fossil fuels and that kind of industry, which of course puts them in a kind of a direct contrast between their environmentalist work. Now, this advertising network, Conscious Advertising Network, it was founded by members of Stop Funding Hate, the advertising boycott group, which is running campaigns against many newspapers and indeed this broadcaster. And so the question now for them, I suppose, is one of hypocrisy. You're putting on this message about advertising and this harmful link. Well,
right. So no laws broken as such, but obviously it's the stance they've taken. What about the Advertising Standards Authority? I mean, does it have an overview on this in terms of what they've been saying or not saying?
Well, the Integrated Society of Brand Agencies called on agencies and brands to embed themselves within the Conscious Advertising Network. So they're a very serious player. They haven't responded to this latest development. But we reached out to 5 major brand agencies that have signed up to the Conscious Advertising Network. None of them gave comment, but all have joined since 2021, so very modern ambition, a very recent arrival. Lord Frost told me this morning that he was saying that agencies and brands should really take a look at their links to the Conscious Advertising Network. He alleges that they're more interested in shutting down legitimate discussion and free speech than actually breaking so-called harmful content.
Has Stop Funding Hate had anything to say?
Not yet.
They always tend to have plenty to say. Not about this, then.
Well, they actually helped the Conscious Advertising Network develop their so-called hate speech manifestos. They were intimately involved in the running of this operation, but they haven't commented on these latest allegations just yet.
OK, Charlie, thank you very much for updating us on that, and we'll see, of course, what further reaction there is to that investigation we've been undertaking. Now, let's move on to what might be happening in terms of your ticket office if you're trying to dodge the strikes and get on a train to get somewhere.
Yeah, I've been one of the thousands of people that's been given the leaflet in the ticketing office. What do I think of the consultation into the plan to close hundreds of ticket offices in England? Well, the consultation, and this is good news because I haven't actually replied to it yet, the consultation has been extended until the 1st of September. Comes as critics disputed it, saying it was too short, the consultation, and that the plan is discriminatory.
Well, just to remind you, of course, the rail company is attempting to modernise the railway, they say, but cutting costs too. With the ticket offices, of course, vital, yes, for those who can use cash or only want to use cash. And, of course, it ties in with our Don't Kill Cash campaign. Just to remind you, you can still sign up, more than 230,000 so far. There are the details on screen for you. Our reporter, Anna Riley, has a little bit more for us now on this story.
Plans for the closure of hundreds of ticket offices across train stations in England have been opposed by the RMT union as part of their Save Our Ticket Offices campaign. There's fears for job losses and the impact on vulnerable and disabled passengers. And RMT members have been encouraging the public to share their views on the measures as part of a 3-week consultation that ends today.
We've had over 100,000 signatures across the country with people supporting us on the online campaign. We've also got a postcarding campaign. We've got a national campaign to try and get the word out and try and get people writing to their MPs. And what we're seeing is a mass return of people saying to us, we don't want this to happen. It's not just about selling tickets. They know it's about assisting people that need the help. You know, the vulnerable people, the disabled people. We want this railway to be accessible and affordable for everybody. And without a fully staffed station, it's not going to be.
In Hull, the Trades Council also support the RMT campaign.
The closure of the ticket offices is not just an attack on a union, it's an attack on the public as a whole. And the number of people that are going to struggle because of the closures of ticket offices, I think, will be immense.
The Rail Delivery Group believe the facilities are no longer necessary, as only 12% of train tickets are bought from ticket offices. They said most customers opt to purchase their ticket online or at ticket vending machines. We want to bring ticket office staff into other parts of the station to give face-to-face help with a much wider range of support. The industry will continue to work with accessibility and passenger groups to ensure that no one is left behind. Last year, on average, a ticket was sold from Hull Paragon Interchange ticket office every 1.6 minutes. Here's what passengers at the station think of plans to close it.
Disgusting. It really is taking people's jobs. People like myself that cannot use technology. I wanted to ask a person to do my rail card and plus sort my tickets out for September. There's no one there to do it, and I can't use the machine because I can't do it on card.
My wife has to use a wheelchair. She has Huntington's disease, and without ticket offices we can't travel on trains. Yeah, she can't even see the bloody screens. And then, you know, I think they should stay open.
It wouldn't really bother me because I can do it online anyway, but it's not that difficult.
Well, I don't really use the ticket offices. I normally use it on my phone, but I suppose in the sense of people losing their jobs, that would be a problem.
I've had to put my glasses on to do it, so I'm getting that way, and I think we need to be thinking about inclusivity.
Passenger watchdogs will now review the public consultation, and the government may ultimately decide on whether or not to press ahead with the proposal. Anna Riley, GB News, Hull.
Always a good thing to put your glasses on when you're trying to get those tickets. Anyway, Britain's Foreign Affairs...
You know that very well.
Indeed. Britain's Foreign Affairs Committee saying the time is now for the country to take action against the growing threat of Russia's mercenary group, the Wagner Group.
Yeah, the cross-party committee of MPs says the group should be recognised as a terrorist organisation, adding that the government underestimated the dangerous growth of Wagner.
Well, joining us now, Ukrainian Parliament advisor Mykola Volkivsky. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Just to ask you, where is the Ukrainian intelligence assessment of where Wagner is at the moment and what the current threat is that they could be posing?
Of course, we received a lot of information about the movement from Wagner Group from Russia to Belarus side. We're not pretty sure about the future of this group in Belarus or, for example, in some African countries. But we received a lot of information that this topic will be negotiated tomorrow during the Russia-African summit. We know that Russia announced that a lot of African leaders will participate on a level of the head of the states to St. Petersburg's forum tomorrow, especially I think around the 17 leaders of the states and 49 official delegation and level of vice presidents. And this topic will be on a closed-door negotiation about the future movement of Wagner Group to some African countries where they already had some experience since 2014. I mean, like Central African Republic, it's already the president of Central African Republic is in Moscow, is in Russia. Libya, Syria, or will they stay in Belarus, as mentioned by Alexander Lukashenko during the summit with Vladimir Putin, you know, on this Monday? We're not pretty sure about this, but more and more Wagner groups right now moving to Belarus side, especially if we talk about the borders near the Lithuania and Poland. From this reason, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland, they already make some planning, you know, in securing the border. If I'm not wrong, it's about 398 kilometers, the common border between Poland and Belarus.
Yeah, and of course, therefore, an indirect challenge to Ukraine as well. We understand that the EU is indicating that it may take some kind of sanctions against the Wagner Group as such, but we had assumed perhaps that after Prigozhin had failed in that attempt to march on Moscow effectively, that they were a busted flush, but you don't think that may be the case?
Right now, and the great time, you know, to hear the world leaders, the words of Alexander Lukashenko, what he said it to Vladimir Putin in this Monday. The Wagner is thinking, you know, to have some trip, sightseeing trip, as he said, to Warsaw or in Rzeszów. Why he mentioned it's Rzeszów, it's a city just near the Polish-Ukrainian border. It was a city when a lot of humanitarian and in military supply was sent to Ukraine. From this reason, he said the Wagner groups right now thinking about some entries of NATO membership country. If we see the article number 5, when it's written, it's no any solutions, you know, to the NATO to make the article number 5, because it's no, the Minister of the Defense of Russia or in Belarus not recognized as a part of official under the military and the Ministry of Defense of these groups. From this reason, we are wondering of what will be the next from the thinking, because they not controlled by the Russians. They not under the control of a current leader of Belarus, Lukashenko. They was waiting, you know, for the latest information in terms of Prigozhin. But after 1 month of some, you know, some what happened, they waiting for the next. As I'm not wrong, the Putin mentioned, or some leaders of Kremlin, and the 25 or 26 of June, they should proceed and going back to Africa when they were staying until 24th of February 2022.
Yeah.
And we don't know, we don't even confirm any planes was, you know, departed to the African countries since this period of time from Belarus.
Indeed, so an unknown quantity still. But Mykola, thank you very much updating us there from Ukraine on that. Thank you.
In the next hour, the Med on red alert. Are you going there? Stay with us, because we will bring you the latest on those wildfires that are spreading across southern Europe. Stay with us.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of an east-west split today. Many eastern areas fine and bright. There are a few showers around here, whereas the cloud is thickening further west and outbreaks of rain are moving in. Thanks to this area of low pressure and these weather fronts already bringing thickening cloud to Northern Ireland and some outbreaks of rain trickling in here by lunchtime. That rain also spreading to West Wales and parts of southwest England. Many central and eastern areas dry and bright. Just a few scattered showers over northeast England and southeast Scotland. In the sunny spells in the east, the wind's pretty light, so it feels a bit warmer than recent days, 23, 24 degrees. The breeze picking up as the rain arrives, feeling on the cool side here. That rain doesn't stop in the west. It continues to spread over the Midlands, southeast England through the evening, and then into eastern England and most of Scotland by the end of the night. It will turn a little drier across Northern Ireland and eventually parts of England and Wales, but staying cloudy, staying warm and humid as well. Temperatures much higher than they were last night, holding in the mid-teens for many towns and cities in the south. A grey, damp, drizzly, breezy start to Thursday. Now, it should get a bit brighter in places. I think the coast and the south and the west likely to stay pretty dull. But over some central and eastern parts, it might just brighten up. If we do see any sunshine, that actually might spark some heavy showers through the afternoon. Some heavier rain across the northeast of Scotland, where temperatures stay in the teens, elsewhere into the 20s.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc. That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant would read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. You're with the live desk here on GB News, and coming up this Wednesday lunchtime.
Learn your lesson, banks are told, in a meeting with the Treasury after the boss of NatWest resigns in the row over the closure of Nigel Farage's Coutts account. But just who else has been debanked because of their political views? We'll have the latest on the scandal.
The Med on red alert. Now, Italy, Mallorca, Ibiza, Menorca and Portugal join the list of spreading wildfires as the entire island of Rhodes in Greece is in a state of emergency. We'll be live with the Greek firefighters on the front line.
Infected blood scandal. Pressure mounts on the Prime Minister to fully compensate thousands of bereaved families. He's due to give evidence to the inquiry this afternoon.
And we'll be saying happy birthday to Mick Jagger as he turns 80 today, proving you can always get what you want. As a wrinkly rocker, at least. First, the latest headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. The former CEO of NatWest is no longer a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. A government spokesperson also confirms that Dame Alison Rose has resigned from her roles as co-chair of the Energy Efficiency Task Force and as a member of the Net Zero Council, after being asked to step down by the Secretary of State. It comes after Miss Rose admitted she discussed Nigel Farage's relationship with the bank Coutts to a BBC journalist. Well, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, told us that proposals are being put forward to benefit banking customers.
It's very important that customers can have trust in their bank, that they're not going to have their services withdrawn because of their political views or something within the law that they have said. That's what I reiterated to all of the UK's bank and building society bosses at a meeting this morning that we've just had. And it's why the government is bringing forward changes to the regulations to make that even clearer, to mean that customers do have to get a reason, have longer to look at other arrangements and have greater opportunity to challenge that.
Wildfires circling the Mediterranean have claimed the lives of more than 40 people. 3 people have died in Greece, with temperatures there today set to exceed 44 degrees Celsius. 34 people have died in Algeria, and a number of fatalities have been recorded in Italy. That includes 3 dead in Sicily, as wildfires and a storm hits the country. Blazes have also broken out in other parts of the world, including Portugal, Syria, Gran Canaria, southern France and Tunisia. Meteorologist Jim Dale told us the high temperatures are not going down anytime soon.
The world's hotting up, and it does include the Mediterranean, and this kind of thing that you've seen in the photographs here, in the video, this is going to continue. There is slightly cooler air, I say cooler, less hot air moving through the middle of the Mediterranean. So Italy, Sicily, Spain, these sort of places, a little bit of a relief, but not for Turkey, not for Greece. I think it will continue in the oven.
The Prime Minister is to give evidence at the infected blood inquiry today. Rishi Sunak will be questioned on the government's response to the use of infected blood and blood products after thousands of patients developed HIV and hepatitis C through contaminated products in the 70s and 80s. Protests have begun this afternoon calling for full compensation payments to those affected. A consultation on train ticket office closures, which was due to end today, has been extended to September the 1st. Train operators unveiled proposals earlier this month for multiple closures of the offices after the Transport Secretary Mark Harper urged them to cut costs. The plans are criticised by groups representing passengers and by the RMT. Junior doctors in England have announced a 4-day walkout next month in a dispute over pay. The strikes are taking place from the 11th to the 15th of August in the next round of monthly strike action from the BMA. The union says it is not for the Prime Minister to decide that negotiations are over before he has even stepped in the room, and the dispute will only end at the negotiating table. The former head of the police watchdog accused of rape is to face trial next year. 64-year-old Michael Lockwood is accused of 9 sexual offences against a 14-year-old girl when he worked as a part-time lifeguard at Humberside Sports Centre in the 1980s. He stepped down as Director General at the Independent Office for Police Conduct last year. He's previously indicated not guilty pleas to the charges. The owner of Tottenham Hotspur has been charged over an alleged insider trading scheme. 86-year-old British billionaire Joe Lewis is accused of abusing his access to corporate boardrooms and providing inside information to others, who then allegedly made millions of dollars in the stock market. A Tottenham club spokesperson says it's a legal matter unconnected with the club. And the world's longest-running comic, Beano, is celebrating its 85th anniversary this week. More than 4,100 issues of the Beano have been printed since its launch in 1938. Well, a special commemorative issue is now on sale, featuring famous faces, including the King, the Queen and the Prince and Princess of Wales. This is GB News. We will, of course, bring you more as it happens. Now, back to our very own King and Queen, Mark and Pip.
Now, let's update you here on the live desk on the continuing ramifications of the Nigel Farage bank account issue, making themselves known particularly on the markets. We can update you that NatWest shares currently are 3.66% down, trading at 242, although we should reflect that actually elsewhere in the FTSE, other bank shares have been hit too. Lloyds Banking Group down as much as 4.9% earlier. Well, this comes as the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer added his voice to the debate, stating that NatWest had got this one wrong. Indeed, industry chiefs admitting that public trust has been hit by the issue.
Despite NatWest's board saying just last night that it had full confidence in the bank's CEO, Dame Alison Rose, she stood down in the early hours after Downing Street indicated it had significant concerns about the bank's handling of Nigel Farage's account with its subsidiary Coutts.
Well, let's get more now with Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, Matt Goodwin, who can join us. And Matt, it does seem that finance and politics is mixing on this now, with Sir Keir Starmer having added his voice. And, of course, Andrew Griffith, the banking industry or trade secretary, or Treasury secretary, to say, indicating to the sector they need to get their house in order.
Well, I think they do. I think if you look at the banking sector more generally, what we're seeing here is really nothing short of the politicisation of our banks. They have clearly become too political in how they're conducting business. They've become clearly quite biased against the majority of people who supported Brexit, who might hold different beliefs to their own. And of course, what we've seen in recent years are a number of banks jumping onto Twitter and other social media to essentially tell people to go elsewhere if they don't agree with these liberal, progressive, woke values. So I think the sector is crying out for reform, and I think Number 10 have done very well to act quickly. But I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a much bigger debate in this country about how to reform the institutions and bring them closer to the people.
What would be the first thing you would do then when it comes to reforming the institutions?
Well, the first thing is we have large corporations, large banks and others spending billions of pounds a year on political initiatives, diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives, all of these things that really are very political in their tone and their outlook. I think we need a government review of some kind into just what is happening within the financial sector, within this sort of so-called woke capitalism, the way in which companies are now increasingly screening their workforce and customers through the lens of politics, which they should not be doing. And I think that's not just limited to the banks, by the way. I think that also is really about our public institutions, the National Health Service, the civil service, our universities. We should not be having institutions that are no longer neutral, no longer balanced, no longer free of politics. They are becoming clearly much more political, and it always seems to lean in one particular direction. So I think we need to really get some reforms underway, and we need a big national conversation here about what is happening in the institutions.
Yeah, however, the banks obviously have a different responsibility to other bodies, in particular, as Angela Knight, the former chief executive of the British Bankers Association, told us, things imposed by the government themselves in terms of looking at fraud and money handling and so on. And also now the PEP, the politically exposed persons sort of regulations, which again were imposed on them. They have to fulfil that.
Well, some of those things have been imposed on them, but others have not. I don't think anybody has imposed a requirement on NatWest and other banks to jump onto Twitter and lecture customers about political views and tell people that they should not be banking with them if they don't agree with radical gender identity theory, or telling people to go elsewhere if they don't want
NatWest actually done. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Matt. Has the bank actually done that on Twitter?
We've had a number of large financial institutions.
No, has NatWest done that? I have to challenge you on that. Has NatWest done that in your understanding?
My memory of NatWest on Twitter recently was there was a dispute over the use of gender pronouns, and NatWest taking issue with customers who felt uncomfortable about the use of gender pronouns within the institution. And that came after similar large corporations and retailers like Sainsbury's lecturing people on the need to celebrate things like Black History Month. So what I'm saying is we have a much broader challenge in our society here, which is not unique to Britain. It's happening across the West, but institutions going openly political, aligning themselves with political ideologies, partly because they think it's good for the bottom line. Maybe they're trying to distract from undermining workers' rights or not paying tax, but this should not be happening to the extent that it is happening, which is why I think this scandal is just the beginning of a much bigger debate and discussion in this country about the nature of business and the role of politics in business.
Why do you think it has taken the scandals surrounding Nigel Farage for all this to come to the fore? Because there's so many people that have been denied bank accounts over the years, including, for example, British Muslims. Now, that was raised with the former Chancellor, George Osborne, and still nothing has been done.
Well, I think, firstly, Nigel Farage played this one very well. I think he clearly was ahead of the debate and also went to extreme lengths to get hold of the material that should have been made available to him instantly. He had to go through a lengthy process to get that report, to find out what the bank was saying about his finances. And to be frank, he is one of only a very few people in the country with a profile that is big enough to essentially force the agenda on this issue. And that's what he's done. But he's right this morning to say that this is actually the beginning, not the end of the issue, that this is the beginning of a much broader debate in this country about what is happening within the institutions and why people who hold unfashionable views among the elite often find themselves being silenced or marginalized by these institutions. So I think this is really day one in a much longer running story and scandal in Britain, and I think it's long overdue.
Yeah, I don't think Nigel Farage has been silenced in particular this example, but there we are. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there. Matt Goodwin, Professor of Politics at the University of Kent. More reaction, of course, as we get it. Andrew Griffith meeting those bank bosses this morning.
Turning to the wildfires now. I know we've been talking about them all week, but they are getting very serious. They are spreading right across the Mediterranean because a blaze near Lisbon in Portugal has been brought under control. But the authorities are remaining in a very mountainous area near the city in case the fire reignites.
Well, the alert also raised to extreme now for Mallorca down in the Balearics off the Spanish coast, adding to the challenges, of course, for tour operators and holiday companies as ever more British holidaymakers prepare to leave this weekend.
Well, meanwhile, in Greece, a state of emergency has been declared now for the entire island of Rhodes as flames continue to rage on the holiday hotspot.
Let's cross to the island now and join our reporter, Paul Hawkins. And, Paul, you are on the front line with those firefighters updating us as we could see the smoke and the flames. What's the situation there now?
So they dashed off to another fire, Mark, and we've actually they dealt with that fire. I mean, they keep springing up all over this part of the island. In fact, if you have a look over here, look what's coming down the hill here. We're in Pelikanos. It's a small village just up the road from where we were, and you can see they said that they knew there was fires at the top of the mountain, and that as the day progresses, they're expecting them to come down the hill. So you can see them coming down the hillside there. And then if you have a look over in the distance, if we pivot 180 degrees, look at the volume of smoke that is in the sky, which tells us that there are some pretty serious fires burning just over those hills there. Now, between the top of those mountains and where we are now, a lot of the undergrowth has been burnt away. So you would hope that the fires wouldn't be able to progress any further than where they are now. But that's the situation at the moment. The police over here taking a break as we look at them. And over here, there are some fire trucks, emergency drinks and water. This restaurant's kind of become like a hub for volunteers, actually. We're going to speak to some of them now. We're going to transmit, and we have something to thank them for personally. Can I just say thank you for rescuing my microphone earlier? Thank you very much. What's your name?
Yamadish.
Yeah, so basically we drove off with this microphone on top of the car, and then they changed it up off the road, which was very kind of them, myself having a senior moment. But could you just tell us, what have you been doing with these in terms of volunteering?
Everything we can do. Yeah. We left our jobs behind. We are here, we're helping with everything. People have the trucks,
yeah,
and they're carrying water. Some others we're just trying to end the small fires.
Yeah.
We bring water, we bring everything. We're trying to make some zones to empty. As we see the fire coming down, we're trying to make some zones so the fire will stop.
Yeah, yeah, and by that you mean cutting the trees away so that the fire can't spread.
Small trees, because we cannot go in the forest with these big trees and cut them off so easy.
Yeah. How bad is this in your experience?
What happened?
These fires.
Now?
Yeah.
It's really big.
Sorry?
It's really big, the disaster. We just wait to end the fires, so we see after what really happened. But it's really big. It's like the whole island cut in two pieces.
Yeah.
The fire starts up and left and ends right and down.
Yeah, heading south.
Yes.
Yeah, away from the north of the island.
Yeah, it's away. The north side is okay.
Yeah.
You have to drive around 30-40 minutes to see what's going on.
Yeah, pretty bad. Listen, I'm going to let you get back to your work. Thank you so much for speaking to us and for rescuing our microphone. Thank you so much for that. So, look, volunteers that have been helping out with this effort, they've been getting a lot of support from the local community. Everyone's rallying together. And when it comes to the tourists as well, we know speaking to them, they've had some choice words to say about the tour operators and about their package operators, travel insurance providers, all that sort of thing. But one thing's universal. They've been really, really, really thankful for the Greek people that have been helping them out as well.
And Paul...
If it hadn't been for the locals, I don't know what we'd have done. Because these poor locals, God bless them, they brought us food, they brought us water, they brought us, like, things.
Yeah.
And they weren't worried about themselves.
Yeah.
There was companies that brought Starbucks.
Well, Paul, of course, this is a theme that many people have been thanking the Greek villagers and townspeople for the help, the food, the even shelter they've been providing. But you've touched on something very interesting there. And these emergency workers, a lot of them are volunteers. They're doing it on top of other jobs that they've got, and they must be absolutely exhausted by now.
Yeah, they are. We spoke to a couple from London who hopefully we'll hear from in the next hour. One of them, both Londoners, one of them's Greek. This is his village. So they've been here helping the volunteers, and it's all we keep hearing is how people are surviving on 3-4 hours of sleep a day. They get back up, and even when they're not actively doing something, they're staying awake to watch the fires, taking rotations through the night. So this is extremely exhausting, and you have to ask yourself, can it continue? I mean, surely it is not sustainable, both in terms of the length of these fires that we're seeing, but in terms of future years, if this is going to keep happening every summer. So a lot of people here say that, look, once we've dealt with these fires and we've got out of this situation, we're going to have a serious rethink about contingency planning and resources from the government and from the European Union.
One thing we should also note as well, Paul, is the effect that these wildfires have had on wildlife as they've, torn through places. We're just looking now at some, quite upsetting, haunting images of rabbits. I think there was a firefighter who was carrying 2 rabbits and a cat in his arms to safety. They've been devastated by this too, haven't they? People have lost their pets.
Yeah, no, they have, absolutely. And that's why, speaking to volunteers, spoke to one woman yesterday who was from a volunteer animal shelter. They've been helping to package up water, package up food, and then leave it out in these kind of wild areas for the animals. And then the animals that have suffered injuries because, or maybe even just from inhaling the smoke, they've taken them into their own homes. So they're looking at as much for the animals as they are for other people and for tourists and for businesses. This area, this part of the island, is pretty devastated right now. There's no power, there's no internet, you can only take cash payments. It's difficult at the moment, but they're getting through it, they're being resilient, and once they do get through it, they want more long-term planning, more resources from the central government.
Paul, thank you for that. Take care of that microphone, and hopefully we can speak to you a bit later as a result of that. But thanks very much for updating us there on the front line. Still to come here on the live desk, we'll get the thoughts of a senior meteorologist on if there's any kind of relief in sight for all those firefighters. Stay with us.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of an east-west split today. Many eastern areas fine and bright. There are a few showers around here, whereas the cloud is thickening further west and outbreaks of rain are moving in. Thanks to this area of low pressure and these weather fronts already bringing thickening cloud to Northern Ireland and some outbreaks of rain trickling in here by lunchtime. That rain also spreading to West Wales and parts of southwest England. Many central and eastern areas dry and bright. Just a few scattered showers over northeast England and southeast Scotland. In the sunny spells in the east, the wind's pretty light, so it feels a bit warmer than recent days, 23, 24 degrees. The breeze picking up as the rain arrives, feeling on the cool side here. That rain doesn't stop in the west. It continues to spread over the Midlands, southeast England through the evening, and then into eastern England and most of Scotland by the end of the night. It will turn a little drier across Northern Ireland and eventually parts of England and Wales, but staying cloudy, staying warm and humid as well. Temperatures much higher than they were last night, holding in the mid-teens for many towns and cities in the south. A grey, damp, drizzly, breezy start to Thursday. Now, it should get a bit brighter in places. I think the coast and the south and the west likely to stay pretty dull. But over some central and eastern parts, it might just brighten up. If we do see any sunshine, that actually might spark some heavy showers through the afternoon. Some heavier rain across the northeast of Scotland, where temperatures stay in the teens, elsewhere into the 20s.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Watching.
And welcome back to the live desk. Well, we were just updating you there live in Rhodes with thousands of Britons being rescued. The wildfires, though, having a devastating impact there on the island. State of emergency there. But elsewhere in Europe, Italy, Mallorca, Ibiza, Menorca and Spain. Now Croatia and Portugal, too, joining a growing list of the spreading wildfires.
That is quite a long list. Well, Jim Dale is a senior meteorologist at British Weather Services, and he joins us now. For people watching, many of whom will be booked to go to these places, Jim, how worried should they be, and should they still go?
Hi, Pip. Look, I think worry's probably a little bit strong. I think you just got to take the advice that the governments, I should say, of the countries that are involved, our own government, in terms of what they're putting out at the moment. They're saying, not, it's your choice. I think that's where it remains. But you know what? The beacons have been lit across the Mediterranean. I could mention Croatia above Dubrovnik are seeing wildfires now. So that tinder dry situation continues. There is no sign of the end of that at this moment in time. It is a little bit less hotter actually today. There is some slightly cooler air, I should say. It's not really cool, but it's slightly cooler air moving down. So that's a fig leaf, if you like, because the ground is still tinder dry, and it only takes a spark. It only takes maybe an arsonist and maybe an accident for these things to flame up, as you've seen.
We were talking to Paul on Rhodes Live a few minutes ago. It does appear the wind there has actually dropped significantly, and I know it can obviously start gusting again, but is this one of the major tests as to what happens for this coming weekend? If the wind drops, then obviously the firefighters can get on top of it.
Okay, so there's two things that will, if you like, dampen a wildfire. The first is rain, which there isn't a great deal of, to be frank with you. I don't think the Mediterranean is going to see, apart from an odd thunderstorm here or there, next to nothing. The second one is lack of fuel. So if it burns an area and then it reaches a point where, let's just say, it's barren, there's no shrubs, no trees, then that's the limit as far as it will go. For the rest of it, it really is just a matter of time. I don't see this as, because it's still hot, because it's still going to go in that direction, then wind is your enemy in terms of moving it from place to place. It always will be. It's how these things spread. But if the wind is lower, as you suggest, Mark, and as I can see, then for the most part, the wildfires will tend to be limited, and mainly to the mountain areas, the rural areas, rather than necessarily the coastal areas or the towns themselves. It tends to be like that.
What about some naysayers, although there's plenty of them out there, that are saying, well, it's all due to wildfires. It's not climate change, it's the wildfires.
Well, we've always had wildfires, make this absolutely clear, but I don't think we'd be seeing what we're seeing now. We certainly wouldn't be seeing the temperatures that we're seeing both on the land and in the ocean surrounding. Record temperatures in the Mediterranean just reached 28.4 yesterday, so that's an all-time high. So, look, that's the background to this. The Met Office have put an issue out that basically says this would not have been happening in the way it's happening without the topping of climate change. And you've got to remember that yes, the Mediterranean is already hot. It normally is that way, but it's the extremes when you get to these sort of silly temperatures, and it's everywhere, and not just here, but in China, in the United States. You can probably hear a car alarm going off in the background. And that's the way it is. So it's not just located in the Mediterranean. It is elsewhere, and that's the problem. And so it is very much the topping of climate change that we're talking about.
OK, maybe the heat has set that alarm off, even though Manchester, of course, you won't be quite as hot as the Med, indeed. Jim, as ever, thanks for updating us, and, of course, we'll continue to give people the latest information. As we said, it's spread now from, well, Portugal on the Atlantic coast of Portugal all the way over to Crete. And in terms of Rhodes, where we're updating now, the whole island is in a state of emergency. We'll update you as we get more.
Well, a roundup of all your news headlines coming up shortly. And then we're talking about the owner of Tottenham Hotspur and one of Britain's richest men who's been charged with insider trading in the US. Stay with us.
Good afternoon, I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. The former CEO of NatWest is no longer a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. Dame Alison Rose resigned from her roles as co-chair of the Energy Efficiency Task Force and as a member of the Net Zero Council after being asked to step down. It comes as Miss Rose admitted she discussed Nigel Farage's relationship with the bank Coutts to a BBC journalist. Shares in NatWest have slumped by 3%, wiping more than 600 million off the bank's stock market value. Well, speaking to us here at GB News, Nigel Farage says that Dame Alison's resignation had to happen.
I didn't think she could last beyond the end of the week. We have on Friday the half-yearly figures coming. There is an investor meeting at 9:30 that morning. So she's gone, and that's a start. It was the board that sanctioned this culture, a culture that talks about diversity and inclusion and actually is very divisive. And in my case, as you could clearly see, pretty poisonous stuff. I think any board member that endorsed that statement last night, where they said we breached confidentiality, but she can stay in her post, frankly, I think the whole board needs to go.
Wildfires circling the Mediterranean have claimed the lives of more than 40 people. 3 people have died in Greece, with temperatures there today set to exceed 44 degrees Celsius. 34 people have died in Algeria, and a number of fatalities have been recorded in Italy, which includes 3 dead in Sicily, as wildfires and a storm hits the country. Blazes have also broken out in other parts, including Portugal, Syria, Gran Canaria, southern France and Tunisia. A consultation on ticket office closures, which was due to end today, has been extended to September the 1st. Train operators unveiled proposals earlier this month for mass closures of station ticket offices after Transport Secretary Mark Harper urged them to cut costs. The RNIB says it's concerned about the impact this will have on blind or partially blind people. That's you up to date, but you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website. That is gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
All right, let's take a look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2911 and €1.1672. The price of gold is at £1,528 and 4 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100, that is at 7,647 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
you should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Live Desk on GB News. The Prime Minister will give evidence at the infected blood inquiry within the next hour, with families calling for full compensation after being offered only interim payments so far of up to £100,000.
Well, the inquiry set up back in 2017 to look into how thousands of patients in the UK developed HIV and hepatitis C after being given contaminated blood in the 1970s and 1980s. 2,900 people have died so far, some of them from AIDS, after what's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS.
Sue Threecall is the widow of one of the victims. She thinks the government has been sidelining the compensation process for years, and she hopes to get answers from Rishi Sunak today.
I hope that he's thoroughly, completely put on the spot and that finally we might get some answers. I mean, it depends on how well he's been briefed, because to date his memory doesn't seem to be very good about the scandal at all. But you have to bear in mind that this is only one of many prime ministers that we've dealt with over the years. I started campaigning in 1985, before my husband died in 1991. And we have, as a group of campaigners, we have dealt with every prime minister, every successive government of every colour ever since.
Well, let's get more with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who is outside the hearing, and indeed with many other protesters who will want to obviously get their views known to the Prime Minister. And he's indicated that perhaps the government will wait for the full report from the inquiry, which will take yet more time, Tom.
That's precisely the case. There have been a series of interim reports published by this inquiry over the past few years, since it was set up in 2017. But we're not expecting the full wrapping up conclusions to come until the late autumn. And for people who want answers and people who are expecting compensation, that is simply too long to wait. It's expected that a further 25 victims may die over the next few months until the conclusion of this inquiry, if the current trends continue. And that would mean around 3,000 deaths as a result of this scandal that ran, of course, from 1970 through to 1991. The NHS importing infected blood products and injecting them into those it was trying to treat. I spoke to some of those who are victims themselves and whose family members have been victims of this scandal as they were waiting to get inside the inquiry a little earlier today.
I've had some compensation because I was infected. There are a lot of affected people who lost their children and their parents and different family members, and they need to have an interim payment too. I want answers. I want closure. I want to know why it happened, because it didn't need to happen. They knew that the blood was bad. They knew that it was infected, and they still chose to give it to us because of money.
The government, successive governments, have failed everybody, and this one has the opportunity. And to be fair to Theresa May, she did bring a public inquiry after much pressure from the governments for the other manifestos as well. But she did bring it, and it's about time Rishi Sunak sorted it out.
Scepticism, anger, it's all here today. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what people say inside.
So it's this quest for justice. All the little boys that were taken, their voices stolen. While I've still got my voice, I speak for them. And we're going to see what the Prime Minister says today. It's only right that the Prime Minister now, Rishi Sunak, delivers that justice, the compensation, and allows people to live in peace.
Well, apologies for some of the sound quality, though, on the clips there. But, Tom, clearly they've all got the same story. And we reflect that, of course, the chairman, Sir Brian Langstaff, back in April was saying it's not just for those directly infected, but all those affected as well.
Absolutely. The infected and affected has been a slogan of those campaigning for what they see as justice here over this long inquiry. Of course, it was many decades until this inquiry was finally realised and actioned by the government, and it's been many years since its inception. The fact that it may well be wrapping up in the next few months is little consolation to many of those who've been waiting for quite so long. And of course, there was an interim payment of compensation that went out to some of those who were expecting compensation. However, there are some limitations on how that has been sent out as well. So there are many, many questions that people waiting for compensation, demanding that compensation, have for the government. And of course, it's not just the fact of whether that compensation will be given, it's also how and how quickly. Those are some of the big questions that are being asked this afternoon.
Indeed. Tom, for the moment, thank you for that. Prime Minister due there in the next 15 minutes or so.
Well, we can speak now to Angela Newcombe, whose son Neil died at the age of, well, he was only 22. He died after contracting HIV in 1994. Good afternoon to you, Angela. Thanks ever so much for talking to us on GB News. I know it's never easy to talk about this, but so important. Can you tell us what you would like to hear from the Prime Minister this afternoon?
Recognition for the children who've passed away. The live infected boys have received money, and people, but the dead, the deceased, have not been acknowledged. Recognition's not been given. As you were saying, Neil died in 1994 from hepatitis C and AIDS. I can't understand why the government are prolonging our agony over this. It needs some immediate action. Why he needs to wait for Sir Brian's final report in the autumn, I do not know. The second interim payment went to him on the 5th of April this year, and still they have not acted upon it. Neil lost his life. And I had to arrange his funeral. No thing any parent wants to do, to arrange their child's funeral. And it's just the recognition and the justice. We want justice. And the quicker it comes, the better for myself and everyone else concerned, and the children who've lost their parents. No one to help them out when they're on hard times. So it's heartbreaking, anger, sadness. The grief is obviously never goes from us parents or anyone when you lose a loved one. But I'm looking for justice, I'm looking for recognition, and I'm not looking for the Prime Minister to use big words and shift things around. It means meaningless conversations you have with him over this subject.
And just to be clear, Angela, that you've not even received one of those interim payments because they were only made to those people directly infected. You're not obviously in that category, but of course you effectively lost part of your life as well.
Yes. Yes, it's only the infected and the widows, partners that have lost their husbands, who actually received the first interim payment of £100,000. My life never is going to be the same when you lose a child, whatever the circumstances. But it's the injustice. As the previous person was saying, they knew it was contaminated when they gave it to them. They drew the blood from America, from prostitutes, from drug addicts, from prisons. What sort of thing did they think they were taking from? It bound to have been dirty blood, and it was contaminated, and they still gave it within their Factor 8 products.
And if this is sorted out sooner rather than later, because I know you have been waiting such a long time, what difference will it make to your life? Because obviously this is far, far more than financial, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yes. I'm a certain age. I just want to live my life now quietly. It's justice, recognition. I don't think I've heard Rishi or anyone say children. Use the word children. I was interviewed the other day. How would he deal with it if his children were affected like this, or a member of his family? how would he deal with it personally? It's the loss of Neil. I visit his grave, and I look across when I'm passing the cemetery. I think, what on earth is he doing down there? He did no wrong. He was infected by this contaminated blood, which shouldn't have happened. And the Prime Minister and other officials said it's a thing that should have never happened. But they've not done anything else about it, in my personal case.
Angela, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. And of course, we'll continue to keep people updated on what's happening in the inquiry and indeed what arrangements are made. But thank you very much indeed.
The Commons Education Select Committee has today published a report calling on the government to consider wider policy changes to help struggling parents and provide access to quality, affordable childcare. As the cost of living continues to bite and the government seeks to expand the workforce, high childcare costs are putting a heavy financial strain on families right across the country. Our political reporter Catherine Forster spoke to the chair of the Education Committee, that's Conservative MP Robin Walker.
This should be a win for parents, a win for children in terms of the extra stimulation support they get, a win for the education system, and a big gain for the economy, because if we can get more people able to sustain their careers whilst also having children, that helps earnings, it helps retention, and it helps economic growth, the amount of tax people pay. So getting this right is really important. And what we've tried to do with our report today is to reflect on the fact that this is a massive expansion of the government's support for the early years and childcare, but they need to get the detail right. They need to make sure that they're providing the right funding.
You talk about funding in your report because a lot of childcare providers say that the current amount that the government give is simply not sufficient to cover their costs.
So this is a really important area, and it's important to remember this report and inquiry was launched before the government made its announcements in the budget. So what we were hearing from providers in the context before these expansions of childcare were announced was real concern about their financial sustainability. We have to make sure that the funding is adequate to meet the needs of the hours that government is supporting. One of the things we also heard from parents is their concern that what they were sold as free hours turned out to be things where they had to pay for. They had to pay for nappies, food, other things in order to make up for the fact that the nurseries weren't otherwise able to keep operating. So we suggested the government should actually talk about funded hours, not free hours. We do think that the free is somewhat misleading. We suggested that there needs to be real engagement with the sector to make sure that as we go forward and as we have this huge and very welcome expansion of childcare, it is properly funded and that funding is constantly monitored against the costs that the sector is facing.
And you also talk about the importance of children with special educational needs, getting them diagnosed sooner. That's important, isn't it?
In many cases, with speech and language therapy, with auditory verbal therapy, with other interventions, that need can be met and that child can then be set on a footing where they can engage with mainstream education for the rest of their school career. That's a win-win. It's a win for the child and it's a win for the taxpayer. If we can make sure we get that early identification of need and early intervention to support those children who will benefit from the right support at that stage, you're potentially saving an absolute fortune through the life of that child and giving them better outcomes. That's why we think making sure that all of the workforce in early years is properly trained to identify the symptoms of SEND and then to be able to refer to the right people outside of the early years workforce is crucial. We're not saying everyone has to be an expert in special educational needs, but we want people to have the tools to pull in the right support, and that is a really important part of what we heard.
And lastly, not everybody wants to go back to work. There's plenty of parents that actually enjoy the chance to stay at home and be with their children longer term. How would the government plan to support those parents as well as parents who want to get back to work?
I think that's a very important question, and it's something that the committee felt strongly about in terms of making sure that there's real choice and flexibility for parents. People live different lifestyles and people will need to take different approaches. That's one of the reasons why we've looked at childminders and the role that they can play as well as the more formal nursery settings, but it's also the reason why we're recommending government look at the tax and the benefit system to see how they can support parents who choose to stay at home with their children.
Now, the owner of Tottenham Hotspur, Joe Lewis, has been charged in America with orchestrating brazen insider trading, as the indictment put it. The billionaire allegedly giving friends, employees and romantic partners information on the companies he'd invested in. He now faces a 19-count indictment with 16 counts of securities fraud and 3 counts of conspiracy.
Ben Jacobs, a sports journalist, can join us now to chat a little bit more about this. Ben, obviously this is very legally sensitive, but from Tottenham Hotspur's point of view, I mean, what impact could it have on the club, reputationally maybe?
Well, I think at this stage, Tottenham are very clear that these charges are unconnected to the club, as a club statement has revealed. And in the Companies House documentation a few months back, it was made clear that Joe Lewis is actually no longer a significant person who has control at the football club. So if we're talking about impact to the football club, I suppose we have to be clear on 2 points. Number one, that these charges are alleged. And number two, that this type of court case, should it proceed, could take months, if not years. And there's also a series of appeals depending on what happens next on both sides. So Tottenham are very relaxed at this point. But I think the broader thing, unconnected to this, is just that Joe Lewis is in his mid-80s, and long before these allegations came in the last 24 hours, there was talk of some kind of investment or even potentially full sale at Tottenham Hotspur. So I think that Lewis has been thinking for quite some time, not connected to these allegations, about life after Spurs. And we now have to wait and see how the charges manifest, and then ultimately how Lewis handles the fact that he's in his mid-80s and may want to think about life after Spurs.
And, of course, that tantalising prize of Spurs itself, as you've indicated, given what the Saudis have been doing with football clubs, and seemingly this attempt to, I think, sports washing is the phrase using, but, you know, wanting to splash the cash to get in.
I think that's one aspect for sure. How Saudi Arabia's moves impact the Premier League is going to be highly significant. But I'd also keep an eye on the Manchester United ongoing sale process, because those looking to sell Premier League clubs will be looking at that price. And obviously the Chelsea one as well, which is already sold and the new owner's a year in. That was 2.5 billion. So keep an eye out on prices and sales of football clubs, because once you hit a certain number for a certain club, others looking to sell obviously use that as a valuation yardstick.
OK, we'll go shopping with you later then. Thanks very much for joining us for the moment, Ben. Thank you.
Do stay with us here on the live desk on GB News. We will be live from the island of Rhodes as it continues. The people there, the volunteers, continue to fight those raging fires which are now spreading across large parts of Europe. Not here, though. It's a bit cooler.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of an east-west split today. Many eastern areas fine and bright. There are a few showers around here, whereas the cloud is thickening further west and outbreaks of rain are moving in. Thanks to this area of low pressure and these weather fronts already bringing thickening cloud to Northern Ireland, and some outbreaks of rain trickling in here by lunchtime. That rain also spreading to West Wales and parts of southwest England. Many central and eastern areas dry and bright. Just a few scattered showers over northeast England and southeast Scotland. In the sunny spells in the east, the wind's pretty light, so it feels a bit warmer than recent days, 23, 24 degrees. The breeze picking up as the rain arrives, feeling on the cool side here. That rain doesn't stop in the west. It continues to spread over the Midlands, southeast England through the evening, and then into eastern England and most of Scotland by the end of the night. It will turn a little drier across Northern Ireland and eventually parts of England and Wales, but staying cloudy, staying warm and humid as well. Temperatures much higher than they were last night, holding in the mid-teens for many towns and cities in the south. A grey, damp, drizzly, breezy start to Thursday. Now, it should get a bit brighter in places. I think the coast and the south and the west likely to stay pretty dull. But over some central and eastern parts, it might just brighten up. If we do see any sunshine, that actually might spark some heavy showers through the afternoon. Some heavier rain across the northeast of Scotland, where temperatures stay in the teens, elsewhere into the 20s.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon to you. You're with the live desk here on GB News, and coming up for you this Wednesday afternoon.
The fallout from the NatWest scandal, the share price dropped sharply, taking the bank, partially owned by the taxpayer, to the bottom of the FTSE 100 this lunchtime. The Treasury tells the industry to learn your lesson.
The Med on red alert. Now, Italy, Mallorca, Ibiza, Menorca in Spain, Croatia and Portugal all join a growing list of the spreading wildfires. The entire island of Rhodes is put into a state of emergency. We're on the front line with the Greek firefighters.
Infected blood scandal. Pressure mounts on the Prime Minister to fully compensate thousands of bereaved families. He's due to give evidence to the inquiry any minute now.
And the strolling bone rather than the rolling stone. Mick Jagger turning 80, proving you can always get what you want, as a wrinkly rocker at least. We'll be joined by record producer and musician Paul Hardcastle to discuss the legacy of ageing rockers. First, the headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. The former CEO of NatWest is no longer a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. A government spokesperson also confirms that Dame Alison Rose has resigned from her roles as a co-chair of the Energy Efficiency Task Force and as a member of the Net Zero Council after being asked to step down by the Secretary of State. It comes after Miss Rose admitted she discussed Nigel Farage's relationship with the bank Coutts to a BBC journalist. Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, told us proposals are being put forward to benefit banking customers.
It's very important that customers can have trust in their bank, that they're not going to have their services withdrawn because of their political views or something within the law that they have said. That's what I reiterated to all of the UK's bank and building society bosses at a meeting this morning that we've just had. And it's why the government is bringing forward changes to the regulations to make that even clearer, to mean that customers do have to get a reason, have longer to look at other arrangements and have greater opportunity to challenge that.
Firefighters continue to tackle wildfires circling the Mediterranean, claiming the lives of more than 40 people. Around 3,000 holidaymakers have fled Rhodes, with temperatures there today set to exceed 45 degrees Celsius. A major heatwave is sweeping across North Africa, where at least 34 people have died. In southern Italy, around 2,000 people have been evacuated from 3 hotels in a popular tourist destination as fire rages close by. Blazes have also broken out in other parts, including Portugal, Syria, Gran Canaria, southern France and Tunisia. Meteorologist Jim Dale told us the high temperatures are not expected to decrease anytime soon.
The world's hotting up, and it does include the Mediterranean. And this kind of thing that you've seen in the photographs here, in the video, this is going to continue. There is slightly cooler air, I say cooler, less hot air moving through the middle of the Mediterranean. So Italy, Sicily, Spain, these sort of places, a little bit of a relief, but not for Turkey, not for Greece. I think it will continue in the oven.
In the past few minutes, the Prime Minister has left Downing Street on his way to give evidence to the infected blood inquiry. Protests are taking place in central London as demonstrators call for full compensation payments to those affected. Rishi Sunak is being questioned on the government's response to the use of infected blood and blood products after thousands of patients developed HIV and hepatitis C through contaminated products in the 70s and 80s. A consultation on train ticket office closures, which was due to end today, has been extended to September the 1st. Train operators unveiled proposals earlier this month for multiple closures of the offices after the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, urged them to cut costs. The plans are criticised by groups representing passengers and the RMT. Junior doctors in England have announced a 4-day walkout next month in an ongoing dispute over pay. The strikes are taking place from the 11th to the 15th of August in what's called the next round of monthly strike action from the BMA. The union says it is not for the Prime Minister to decide that negotiations are over before he has even stepped in the room, and the dispute will only end at the negotiating table. A record number of police officers are quitting their jobs at forces in England and Wales. In the year to March, almost 5,000 officers left after a voluntary resignation. That's the highest number since records began 16 years ago, up 32% since the year 2021 to 22. In the latest 12-month period, 224 officers were also dismissed or had their contracts terminated. That's the highest number since the year 2016 to 17. The owner of Tottenham Hotspur has been charged over an alleged insider trading scheme. 86-year-old British billionaire Joe Lewis is accused of abusing his access to corporate boardrooms and providing inside information to others, who then allegedly made millions of dollars in the stock market. A Tottenham club spokesperson says it's a legal matter unconnected with the club. And the world's longest-running comic, Beano, is celebrating its 85th anniversary this week. More than 4,100 issues of Beano have been printed since its launch in 1938. A special commemorative issue is now on sale. It features famous faces, including the King, the Queen and the Prince and Princess of Wales. Other well-known figures in the special edition include David Attenborough, Adele and Harry Styles. This is GB News. We will, of course, bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Mark and Pip.
Welcome back to the live desk, and indeed let's take you live to the infected blood inquiry. The Prime Minister to be questioned shortly on the government's response to contaminated blood supplies in the 1970s and 80s. The victims' families who've been outside the inquiry calling for compensation payments. He's just being sworn in at the moment. We've heard, of course, from some of the families of those victims saying that effectively they say successive governments have dragged their feet on this issue.
Yeah, the inquiry was set up in 2017 to investigate the infection of thousands of patients with HIV and hepatitis using contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. Around 3,000 people died. Let's just have a listen.
The Exchequer from the 13th of February 2020 until the 5th of July 2022.
Yes, that is correct.
And you were first elected to Parliament in May 2015.
Yes.
Now, you've made a statement to the inquiry. We don't need it on screen at the moment. The reference for lawyers is WITN 77120001, and it's available to all who would like to see it on the inquiry website. Prime Minister, I'm going to start by looking at two documents, two letters that were sent by the then Paymaster General, addressed to you, although you may not actually have seen them, in 2020. So if we could please have Lawrence on screen, EIBS 40706. And we can see the date of the letter is the 13th of July 2020. It's from the Right Honourable Penny Mordaunt MP, who was then Paymaster General, addressed to you, Dear Rishi, and she explained the capacity in which she's writing, sponsoring Minister of the Inquiry, to update on progress and commitments the government has made. And then if we just look at the heading, under the heading Funding the Inquiry, you'll see from the letter she's raising three matters: funding the inquiry, financial support, and then when we go over the page in due course, compensation. I just want to flag up, if I may, and ask you about what's said under the heading Funding the Inquiry. There's reference to public commitment to support the completion of the inquiry's work. And then Ms Mordaunt said this work remains urgent for many victims. Justice delayed is justice denied, as the fallout from this tragedy continues to claim lives. Now, just pausing there, Ms Mordaunt told us, as the letter indicates, that she was aware that people were continuing to die. And it's obviously the case that it follows from this letter that your officials would also have been so aware. Do you know whether that's something you were aware of at the time, that this wasn't just a matter of an historical injustice, but that people were continuing to die and to suffer, as indeed they do to the current day?
Well, just before I address that specifically, if I might start by saying that I believe what has happened has been an appalling scandal. I think thousands of people, obviously many in the room today and others that the Chair referred to who are watching, have suffered for decades. And they've suffered a layer of injustices, in fact. And it hasn't just affected those people who have been directly impacted and affected, it's affected their families and friends and carers as well. So it goes far beyond those who are directly impacted. And as you just said, this is not just about historic wrongs. People are suffering and being impacted today. And I believe every 4 days someone tragically loses their life as a result of what has happened in the past. And as I've been reading the testimonies of those involved, affected and infected, it's been a very moving experience for me, and I commend everyone who shared their testimonies for their bravery. It can't have been an easy thing to do, but has enabled this important work to take place, and indeed I'm pleased to be able to be here to contribute to that important work. With regard to the letter, as is entirely normal, it would have been dealt with and was dealt with by officials. It's not a letter that I saw personally at the time, but again, that is not unusual given the volume of correspondence that ministers, particularly senior ministers like the Chancellor, receive. It would be entirely normal that those letters would be in the first instance dealt with and triaged by officials. And in this particular instance, my understanding is that there was communication between the officials at the Treasury and indeed officials at the Cabinet Office who worked for Penny Mordaunt at the time.
But although the letter didn't come to your attention for the reasons that you've explained, and which echo what we've heard from other ministers in terms of the filter process in relation to correspondence, do you know whether you had any awareness or whether there was any broader awareness within the Treasury or within government at the time about the point that Ms Mordaunt was making here, that people were continuing to die? Was that something you can recall being aware of at that time?
Not something that was brought specifically to my attention that I was involved of. There were 3 topics raised in that letter, which over the course of the following months were all dealt with substantively.
We'll pick up on what happens over the course of the following months. Just looking then still at the highlighted passage on the screen. Justice delayed is justice denied. More broadly, do you understand and accept the point that Ms Mordaunt was making there, justice delayed being justice denied, and how delay itself can compound injustice in this context, the infected blood context?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, this appalling scandal has gone on for decades. I mean, people have been let down for decades by successive governments. People raised concerns. They were battered away and told nothing was wrong, nothing to see here, that wasn't right. People thought that they were being helped when in fact, as it turned out, they were being harmed. People asked for an inquiry, that was rejected before it was finally accepted. So I think over a succession of not just years but decades, justice has been denied to people. They haven't received the recognition that they need and deserve, and that's why I'm so pleased that the inquiry was established, that it's continuing its important work and hopefully will conclude soon, and the government is committed and I'm committed to acting as swiftly as possible.
And we'll come back to the question of government action. If we just go over the page to what Ms Mordaunt said about compensation, so you'll see the heading compensation for victims. She says in the second paragraph, second line, I believe it to be inevitable that the government will need to provide substantial compensation. The costs are likely to be high, and then there's reference to the Irish model. I believe we should begin preparing for this now before the inquiry reports. My officials are working with DHSC colleagues to consider approaches to compensation. Any decision on compensation will require careful consideration. And then she says, experience of other inquiries suggests that early action could save the government significant legal costs, as well as provide victims with compensation as soon as possible. Now, in relation to that sentence I've just read, you'll see Ms Mordaunt there identifying 2 benefits to early action. The first, a potential financial benefit to the government, and then the second, the provision of compensation to victims as soon as possible. I will come back later to this phrase, as soon as possible, but what Ms Mordaunt explained and accepted in her evidence was there she was looking at the question of what was the morally right and just thing to do. Would you accept that?
Well, obviously, Penny could best answer questions about what she was trying to get across in the letter. As far as I can see reading it now, there were 3 topics that she raised of substance. The first was continued funding for the inquiry, which has been delivered on with over £125 million to date being spent on the inquiry to make sure it could do this important work. The second was resolving an issue about parity of treatment between those impacted living in different parts of the United Kingdom. And again, that was resolved in spring of 2021 whilst I was Chancellor, with the provision of an extra £175 million of funding to do so. And the third topic was around compensation, where since that letter was written, interim compensation payments have been made to around 4,500 people, and as people are familiar, £100,000 each. There's a figure mentioned in here. Obviously, to date, over £500 million of those payments have been made. And as the letter itself says, any decision on compensation will require careful consideration. And there's further detail about how Penny envisaged that might happen. Obviously, lots of things have evolved since that letter, not least we've had Robert Falls, the Chair's interim report, but also Robert Francis's report, which have a variety of suggestions which are slightly different to those mentioned in this letter, but again, they've been delivered on. And I think Penny Mordaunt herself said the 3 topics that she raised, all of which she was able to progress.
Yes, and obviously my questions are going to focus on the issue of progress in relation to compensation. Would you accept, and this is a question really about the position of the government as opposed to your own, because you didn't see the letter at the time, as you've explained, but would you agree that this letter indicates that the government was on notice back in 2020 of the likelihood, Ms Mordaunt uses a stronger word, inevitability, of the government needing to pay compensation?
Yes, what I'd say is, obviously, in my role, it was not something that I was directly involved in, because these costs were not, or those forecasts had not been crystallised at that point. The inquiry had been established, it was doing its work, there had been no interim reports from the inquiry, and it wasn't my direct departmental responsibility in the way that it was Penny's, as she would be the responsible minister for it. It wasn't something that, as I said, I was directly involved in at the time, and I think probably because the work was still ongoing and it hadn't reached a point where those decisions on compensation had yet to be made, or any advice or recommendations from the inquiry or others had at that point not been made either.
Let's just look at Ms Mordaunt's follow-up letter, which is...
So, Rishi Sunak being questioned as Prime Minister, but of course relating to matters when he was the Chancellor, when they were discussing the payments, the interim payments in particular, to those affected in this blood scandal, and indications in the letters with Penny Mordaunt, who was at the time was the Paymaster General, about the government being on notice, as the Council said there, from 2020, of the need to pay compensation in these circumstances.
And there are hundreds watching the evidence being given by Rishi Sunak, around 300 survivors and relatives there to watch him, and in fact so many people there that many are sitting in an overflow room and watching the Prime Minister give evidence on a big screen, because this topic of compensation, it is so incredibly sensitive for relatives and families.
Yeah, Rishi Sunak saying the government was committed to acting as quickly as possible on the matter. We'll reflect more on the evidence as it comes through and, of course, get the views of those families still waiting for their money. Now, let's update you on the situation with the wildfires, with a state of emergency now being declared for the entire island of Rhodes in Greece. The fires continuing to rage out of control there at that Greek holiday destination.
Authorities have warned of 6 new regions in Greece now facing extreme danger from wildfires. In the past 24 hours, firefighters have been tackling at least 53 outbreaks on Rhodes alone, with thousands being evacuated from homes and hotels there. Meanwhile, in Portugal, a blaze near Lisbon has been brought under control, but the authorities will remain in the mountainous area near the city in case the fire reignites. The risk alert has also been raised to extreme for Mallorca, adding to the challenges for tour operators and holiday companies.
Let's head back to Rhodes now and join our reporter Paul Hawkins, who's been keeping us updated. They're literally on the front line with those firefighters, Paul. And you were telling us, they are all giving their time and their efforts as volunteers and, of course, defending effectively their own villages and towns there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a great example of the community putting together. Remember, lots of those volunteers, in many cases, they've come from jobs to then do this, or they're doing this instead of doing those jobs. And of course, a lot of jobs here are linked to the tourist industry. So, that's been affected immensely. There's a huge plume of smoke, if I just show you, coming over the hills. But we've come down the road to a village called Kiatari. The fires came all the way through here, jumped the road and went all the way to the beach. If we just have a pivot around here, you can see there's the beach in the distance. That's where a lot of the water planes and the Chinooks have been gathering water, and they then come overhead. So you might see them while we show you what has happened to this supermarket. So this supermarket was really badly hit by the fire around the back, and I'll show you the damage in a moment. But just very quickly, the owner's mother here, she's been in that chair for 3 days. She's on oxygen, which she needs for her own personal health, but because there's no power in the village anymore, she's had to come down here and bring her oxygen. She's been in that chair for 3 days. They're without power here, so they're running on a generator, And if we just have a look here, I know it's a little bit dark, so you may struggle to see, but here, look at all this stock, all this cheese. This is the owner here. He's just showing us this is the cheese that's been, this is finished.
Yeah,
finished, absolutely finished. So all this has got to be thrown out, yeah? Thrown out in the bin, all the stock, everything. And I mean, this stock is non-perishable, so that will stay. But at the moment, they're running on a generator, and there's no card payments. It's just cash, isn't it? Just cash.
No cards, it's only cash.
Only cash at the moment. So the wife of the owner has said that it's been like hell here. So the fire came down here earlier in the week, and if we just have a walk down here, I'm going to show you the damage that there has been to their stock. This is over 200,000 euros worth of damage to the stock. This is where the fire came through earlier in the week and destroyed pretty much all their stock. It also destroyed a vehicle here, this lorry as well. That's actually been the least of their worries, but you can see all the stock here completely damaged, melted through when the fire came through here. And I know that we have been paying tribute to firefighters quite rightly, but they have said that they said to the firefighters, look, these pallets are on fire, you need to come and help now. One of the firefighters said they didn't have the level of authorization needed, and that by the time they did get down here, it was too late. So this supermarket is hoping to recover some of those losses from the insurance, but it's absolutely awful to see, and of course all the tourists have gone away. So while we're talking about figures of 200,000 euros worth of damage, it's going to be much higher than that when you factor in the lack of tourist trade that there is at the moment. The fires continue to burn, volunteers continue to help, and earlier on when we were on the mountainside, we spoke to this couple. They're from London, one of them is Greek, his family are from one of the villages that's been affected, and they've been volunteering to help fight the firefighters, and here's what they had to tell us.
Yesterday it was in a big threat, and thank God the wind changed and the village saved. So now it's okay, but we still are on alert.
Did you have to be evacuated?
They told us to evacuate it, but no one evacuated.
Okay, and then luckily the wind changed and the threat's gone for now.
Yeah, for now, yeah.
But people aren't resting on their laurels. They're not being complacent, right?
No. Where did we sleep?
So we slept yesterday in the monastery on the floor for a few hours as a night shift. So obviously the fires, they raged during the night, so we were kind of keeping an eye out, watch. And we were driving around. We found a few fires last night, which meant that obviously we had to call in the fire services.
Right.
But yeah, it's been quite chaotic. It's been a lot to do with just the volunteers. We've had great support from the fire services, but obviously there's so many fires everywhere. So
yeah, and the volunteers like yourselves, and the guys that are supporting the fire service as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Greek firefighters, they are like 40 hours with no sleep. They are incredible. I feel proud to be next to them, you know.
Paul, this is the theme, of course, that despite that devastation, they keep going and all those Greek villages helping British holidaymakers and tourists. But just tell it, what does it feel like? What does it smell like?
It smells horrible. I mean, frankly, it smells like you'd expect a burning forest to smell, and the ash is just starting to fall, and very eerily, this plume of cloud, which is getting bigger. It is, every time you've crossed to us, it has been getting bigger. It's just about to blot out the sun. Indeed, it blocked out the sun earlier on, and it felt like it dropped a few degrees, if I'm honest. It suddenly got a little bit darker, but you can see the ash falling now. Sometimes it lands in your eye and you've got to wash it out. It smells horrible, it feels horrible, but you just got, the biggest feeling you have is for the people here, quite frankly, because they've never seen anything like this coming. And the word that keeps coming back to me, every time I ask them, hell. This has been hell, and they are very, very upset. There have been a lot of people in tears. They don't know what the future holds, and they're very, very angry with the authorities, especially the government, because the lack of response that there's been, the lack of planning. So it's not just tourists who, of course, they come here for their holiday, for their 2 weeks, to get away from it all, and you can understand their sadness, their anger, their discomfort with what's happened, but they will get to go back to the UK. For the people that are left here, it's going to take years and years and years to rebuild. And of course, next year, they think that with the weather pattern the way it is, that these kind of heat waves are going to become more frequent, and this problem is going to go away anytime soon.
Paul, for the moment, thank you for that. Stay safe, of course. We'll be back to speak to you later. Thank you very much
Brilliant
indeed.
coverage, Paul. Thank you. Well, many holidaymakers will be wondering where this leaves their travel plans. Joining us now is Paul Charles, who is CEO of the PC agency, which advises airlines in crisis scenarios. It does sound like, Paul, very much like the way we are going to be holidaying over the summer and the protection that we have as travellers, it's all going to have to be changed, isn't it?
It will have to be changed. You're absolutely right. We are going to be seeing more wildfires. We have to prepare for this climate crisis to become more of a factor in where we're going on holiday or for trips. And in particular case of Rhodes, I'm really concerned about the state of emergency being declared because it shows that the situation is getting worse. And of course, if the Foreign Office had changed their advice and declared a no travel advisory over the weekend, then tour operators and airlines would not have continued to fly into the region over the weekend, putting more British holidaymakers into the danger zone. So we've got to change how we're dealing with these sorts of crises.
Paul, our reporter, Paul Hawkins, who is in Rhodes at the moment, or on Rhodes, I should say, has been stressing that it is only, I know this is at this moment in time, but it is only a smaller part of the island that has been hit by these wildfires. It is not the whole island. There are many places still open for holidaymakers to go to.
Well, that's true, but it's 10% of the island. But the pressure that is put on the resources on a small island like Rhodes is enormous as more people go in. It puts pressure on the facilities, the medical facilities. It puts pressure on the road and transport infrastructure locally. And it's no surprise, perhaps, that a state of emergency has been declared on Rhodes itself because the pressure is enormous as you add more people in. And that wouldn't have happened if a travel advisory had been issued not to travel from last week.
Are you surprised at how this has unfolded, with all these holidaymakers indicating in a lot of cases they've been left to fend for themselves? One would have assumed that all the travel operators would have had some kind of system to put in place for dealing with the crisis.
I am surprised at the way it's turned out. They do have well-worn plans in place, whether it's an airline, whether it's a tour operator. They have very good, usually, crisis response plans. So it's interesting as to why they didn't work initially. I have to say the response in the last couple of days has been much better from airlines and tour operators. But in the initial stages, it's almost as if there wasn't good enough communication coming out of Rhodes, which is understandable at the start of a crisis. It's almost as if they were not getting any decent advice from government officials on the ground.
Yeah.
And I suspect that the Greek government themselves will want to launch a reassurance plan for not just next year, but certainly the coming weeks in terms of how they're going to reassure people who are due to go to Greece over the coming weeks for their holiday.
Well, indeed, we talk about Greece, but, you know, the latest is on Mallorca, which is hugely popular, of course, with British holidaymakers, that we have an extreme alert there. So I guess, you know, should the industry already be giving advice as to what to do for the Balearics, for instance?
Yes, the industry needs a complete overhaul of the travel advisory concept from the Foreign Office. That needs to be changed in consultation with the industry because these fires are not going away. And we need to see airlines and tour operators rewrite their climate response plans. Many of the plans that have been written over the years, and I've been involved in many, have been around typical crises that would be faced, perhaps involving an aircraft or involving food poisoning or something like that. They've not been designed for a climate crisis. And here we are, certainly the second year running of serious fires affecting people's holidays and affecting livelihoods. Now is the wake-up call for these plans to be rewritten so they take account of future crises because they're not going away.
Just quickly, Paul, is it wise for pilots to tell holidaymakers who've boarded the plane that they shouldn't be going to Rhodes and that they should actually get off?
That was clearly by an EasyJet pilot flying from Cardiff who was very clear in that. And I think it was a very responsible thing to do. I think holidaymakers, all of us, have to think carefully at the moment about the impact we might have if we go to a particular zone which is under threat. The problem is, as I say, the advice that's being given out means that I would lose my money at the moment if I cancelled a trip because I was worried about going. And that's why the system has to change. There has to be a new code of conduct endorsed by airlines and tour operators to be able to be flexible and give people their money back if they are worried about going into a danger zone. And at the moment, there's no incentive for airlines or tour operators to do that because they will lose money themselves. So something's got to give as we see more of these incidents develop.
Paul, thank you very much indeed for your time here in GB News. Thanks for joining us. Let's get an update now on all the headlines. Rory's waiting for us.
Thank you very much, Mark. The former CEO of NatWest is no longer a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. Dame Alison Rose resigned from her roles as co-chair of the Energy Efficiency Task Force and as a member of the Net Zero Council after being asked to step down. Well, it comes as Miss Rose admitted she discussed Nigel Farage's relationship with the bank Coutts to a BBC journalist. Shares in NatWest have slumped by 3%, wiping more than 600 million off the bank's stock market value. Wildfires circling the Mediterranean have claimed the lives of more than 40 people. 3 people have died in Greece, with temperatures there set for 45 degrees Celsius. 34 people have died in Algeria, and a number of fatalities have been recorded in Italy, including 3 dead in Sicily, as wildfires and a storm hits the country. Blazes have also broken out in other parts, including Portugal, Syria, Gran Canaria, southern France and Tunisia. The Prime Minister is giving evidence to the infected blood inquiry. Rishi Sunak is being questioned on the government's response after thousands of people were infected with HIV and hepatitis by contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. In his opening statement, Mr Sunak said, "This is not just about historic wrongs. People are suffering and being impacted today." Protests are taking place in central London as demonstrators call for full compensation payments to those affected. A consultation on ticket office closures, which was due to end today, has been extended to September the 1st. Train operators unveiled proposals earlier this month for mass closures of station ticket offices after Transport Secretary Mark Harper urged them to cut costs. The RNIB says it's concerned about the impact this will have on blind or partially blind people. That's the up-to-date, but you can get more on all of these stories by visiting our website. That is gbnews.com.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to the live desk. Let's bring you some breaking news we're getting from the United States, and they're reporting that the billionaire owner of Spurs, Joe Lewis, has now handed himself in to the US authorities in Manhattan. He's been accused of what the authorities said there was brazen insider trading. The latest we're getting is that he has surrendered to the US Attorney's Office. The federal authorities expected to be presented in the Manhattan Federal District Court sometime today on criminal charges. 13 counts of securities fraud, each of which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison.
Tottenham Hotspur has already given a statement saying the indictment is a legal matter unconnected with the club, and as such, we have no comment.
Now, banking chiefs met the Treasury Minister, Andrew Griffith, earlier today to examine the continuing fallout from the Nigel Farage banking issue. The banks now committing themselves to account closure reforms after the industry chiefs had admitted that public trust had been hit by the Farage case.
Certainly, investor confidence appears to be on the wane. Shares in NatWest, partially owned by the taxpayer, that's you and me, fell more than 3% when markets opened. They have now slid even further down, up to 4% in volatile trading.
Well, talking of volatility, NatWest board saying just yesterday it had full confidence in this woman, the bank's CEO, Dame Alison Rose. But then she stood down in the early hours of this morning after Downing Street indicated it had significant concerns about the bank's handling of Mr Farage's account with its subsidiary, Coutts.
Well, let's go live to NatWest's headquarters and speak to GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. It sounds like, Catherine, that according to Andrew Griffiths, the City Minister, banks are going to have to change, and change pretty quickly.
It does sound like this, and by no means is this only a story about Coutts, Nigel Farage and Dame Alison Rose and what she said or didn't say to the BBC's business editor. It is a wider issue about banks and free speech, because what is emerging is that a number of MPs have indicated that they have struggled to get a bank. And of course, we had last night when Dame Alison Rose came out with her statement, the admission that she'd made a serious error of judgment. But NatWest stood by her, and it was only at the point that concerns were made very clear from number 10 and indeed the Chancellor that an emergency meeting was convened, and she ended up resigning at about 1:45. But certainly the repercussions of this are going on, and the City Minister Andrew Griffith has been meeting with banking chiefs, making very clear to them that it is unacceptable to cancel somebody's bank account because of their political views. He said, "I hope the whole financial sector learns from this incident. Their role is to serve customers well and fairly, not to tell them what or how to think." Now, I was talking to some people a little bit earlier about what they made of all this. Let's have a look at what they had to say.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I closed it because of their behaviour. They are appalling, and the whole board should go.
Don't really have an opinion, but probably she's wrong, isn't she?
No, not really. We don't support Farage, so it's not the matter over which she should have stepped down. I think large companies have to stick by their moral conduct, and they have to preserve their corporate values first and foremost. And supporting clients like Nigel Farage actually jeopardizes their position as a company that actually has any values.
All seems a bit of an overreaction, isn't it?
Do you think?
I think so.
Do you think she should have stayed in position? And the Information Commissioner's Office also saying that they are concerned, saying the banking duty of confidentiality is over 100 years old. It's clear that it would not permit the disclosure of a customer's personal information to the media. So shares are down about 600 million, wiped off the value of NatWest, which is, of course, 39% owned by us, the taxpayer.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed for that. Outside NatWest headquarters, as we're saying, the share price taking a real hit today. Well, let's talk now about the issue in a wider sense and speak to financial services lawyer Ben Kingsley, who can join us. Ben, thank you for your time. We spoke to Angela Knight earlier, who is the former chief executive of the British Bankers Association, and she said that there's already been a cultural change in the banks, and a lot of what's happened is because they were asked to do this by successive governments.
Well, I think it's certainly a fair comment to say that bank culture has been in the spotlight for a number of years now, largely as a fallout of the very serious conduct that was revealed by the financial crisis. But it's also plain that there's still a long way to go. The issues that have befallen RBS and NatWest and Coutts this week are not new, unfortunately. It's been going on for some time, and we know from our own experience at Us For Them, the campaigning organisation that I'm associated with, that banks have been behaving in this way for at least the last year or two. So it's good to see a commitment from government and a commitment from banks that they need to up their game. But this is it's coming quite late in the day, and more needs to be done.
Now, you're the lawyer for Us For Them, as you say. Now, this was a parents' group that campaigned to keep schools open during the pandemic, I should say. Just explain, then, what happened to Us For Them.
Yeah, so Us For Them is a grassroots parents and grandparents organisation. We were very active during the pandemic, campaigning for children's welfare generally to be prioritised and given due prominence in policymaking. And in particular, of course, that led to us campaigning hard on the issue of school closures, which was having a drastic and dramatic effect on children across the country. Back in September of last year, completely out of the blue, PayPal, which had been providing the payment means for Us For Them to receive very small donations from thousands of parents and grandparents across the country, most of them £5, £10, £20. But PayPal, out of the blue, sent an email to our founder to say that they had decided that due to the nature of our activities, they were going to close down our PayPal account And worse than that, they not only froze the account with no notice, they effectively seized all of the funds that were sitting in that account and refused to hand them back.
And just very quickly, does that indicate to you that not only the banks have not been able to police themselves, but the financial ombudsman, the FCA, the whole apparatus has failed as well?
Well, I think there is a question to be asked here about the role that the Financial Conduct Authority can and should be playing here. Back in September of last year, we mobilised very quickly and with support from Toby Young, who leads the Free Speech Union, who suffered the same fate on almost the same day as Us for Them, in what looked like a fairly coordinated takedown by PayPal. We managed to call in for support from actually a lot of MPs, a lot of peers, who wrote to the business minister and to the Treasury at the time and brought this to their attention. We asked then for the regulator to look carefully at what PayPal had done, because it seemed to us to be totally inconsistent with the principles that they're obliged by law to follow, to treat their customers fairly, to act with integrity. And so, yes, there is a role here for the regulator. It seems that they've been slow to act. We would like to see them do more, to act more aggressively, to clamp down on this sort of behaviour. But I think the coming days, the coming weeks, we will see how committed they are to tackling these issues, particularly in relation to what's just happened with Coutts and the resignation of the chief executive.
Ben Kingsley, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and giving us your insight. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Now, let's just update you on what's been happening in the infected blood inquiry, because the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has been giving evidence there because, of course, he was Chancellor at the time of many of the communications between Penny Mordaunt, who's the Paymaster General, and him as Chancellor. But he's acknowledged that the victims of the appalling scandal had suffered for decades. He went on to tell the inquiry that clearly something needed to be done pretty urgently in terms of addressing the issue of the compensation. He's still speaking there now at the inquiry. Let's have a quick listen in.
Would ordinarily wait to have the final report, so it has a full set of findings to make decisions on. There's good legal precedent and reasons for that, and rational decision-making would suggest that is the right thing to do. But I would go back to saying that that doesn't stop the government from acting, and it has acted. The payment, I think, as you acknowledged, the payment of interim compensation payments to 4,500 people is a significant step. It was described as such by Robert Francis, and where I think he described those sums as, in his words, significant amounts, because he recognised at the time that it was likely that ultimate compensation would take time. I believe the first interim report from this inquiry also acknowledged very clearly that it was likely that the government would normally wait until receiving the final report before making decisions, and acknowledge that itself. So that was, as I said, a recommendation in the interim. This inquiry recognised that is what the likely, I think, scenario would be. So I don't think that's untoward, but the government is acting with interim compensation payments, and acting, as you said, to be the first government ever in decades to accept the moral case for compensation. Now, of course, that is only a step towards providing the recognition and redress that everyone here and everyone watching deserves, but it should give people some comfort about mine and the government's determination to sort this out and address it, given we are taking steps that no other government has taken.
What are the sound policy reasons you referred to in your answer a few minutes ago for waiting for the final report in this context?
As I think, as the inquiry acknowledged in its note of the 21st, whilst ongoing policy making is happening, it is difficult for me to comment in detail on those things, and indeed that was something that the inquiry acknowledged in its note on the 21st of July, and indeed something the Minister of the Cabinet Office would have spoken to as well. As I said, in general terms I can talk about it, which is that it is important for rational decision-making purposes, legally if nothing else, to have the full findings of an inquiry before making decisions. That is absolutely precedented in normal advice, and understanding the full context of all the inquiry's findings before making final decisions on something as complex and sensitive as this.
And what, I may be repeating a question, but what is it that the government thinks it will know relevant to compensation that it doesn't already know?
Again, I know this will sound frustrating, but because there are active policies under consideration and legal...
So this is Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, giving evidence at the infected blood inquiry. Just to remind you, talking about the time when he was the Chancellor, discussing the whole issue of the interim payments, £100,000 to some 4,000 people. But clearly the families involved want full compensation and recognition of what they've been through, and that the Prime Minister would indicate would happen after the full report had been published.
We want to show you some pictures, some live pictures from Syria at the moment. We've been talking during the last 3 hours nearly about the wildfires. In fact, we've been talking about it for days now, that are raging across Europe. Well, they are also affecting Syria. There are multiple wildfires across the central Syrian countryside. Temperatures there in parts of the country reaching 40 degrees Celsius. And one fire has broken out on public farmland, and firefighting teams are working tirelessly to stop it spreading.
Right, let's just interrupt. We've got breaking news. Kevin Spacey has been found not guilty at his trial at Southwark Crown Court. Just to remind you, he had been facing charges of sexual assault alleged to have been committed against 4 men between 2001 and 2013. But the jury, we understand, has just returned, and he's been found not guilty of sexually assaulting 4 men. That's just coming through from Southwark Crown Court. Spacey, who's just turned 64, of course, had been involved in this very high-profile case. Elton John giving evidence in his defence, and the defence had told the jury that he'd been tried by social media and effectively had been cancelled as a result of these allegations.
And in the Oscar-winning actor's defence, he always denied using his power as an A-lister to get people into bed, saying he tried to help others and described the allegations as a stab in the back. Well, the jury have been deliberating since Monday for the last 3 days. A verdict has been due at London's Southwark Crown Court since then. 7 counts of sexual assault against 4 men Kevin Spacey was facing, but he has now been found not guilty of all charges. That is the latest information we are getting at the moment.
The prosecutors had said that his accusers were no longer prepared to be secret keepers for someone who had treated them so badly. But clearly the jury has ignored that from the prosecution and gone with the defence, saying that he had effectively been trialled by social media. And the allegations of this behaviour, as the prosecution had put it, between 2001 2013, they tried to paint him as a sexual predator, but that has now been rejected by the jury there at Southwark Crown Court.
That trial has been going on for the last 4 weeks at Southwark Crown Court, and Mr Justice Mark Wall sent jurors out on Monday lunchtime, and so they have been deliberating since then. They heard evidence from each of Spacey's 4 accusers, who do have anonymity. They will not be named, but they variously described the Hollywood star as a vile sexual predator, slippery and atrocious, despicable and disgusting. But so much evidence was heard over the last 4 weeks. Those jurors have been deliberating since Monday, and in the last few moments they have found the Oscar-winning actor not guilty of all offences from those men. The allegations those men were making, 9 charges in total. But Kevin Spacey has been found not guilty at Southwark Crown Court.
Just to update you on what he had been facing in terms of the allegations, the counts included indecent assault, then 7 counts on the original indictments of sexual assault, 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent, and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. As we were saying, all these dating back between 2001 and 2005, and indications from the prosecution that he'd used his position as a Hollywood A-lister to actually pursue this behaviour. But clearly, after what's been a long deliberation by the jury, they have actually rejected that assertion.
Yeah, and it should be noted the effect that this has had on the Hollywood actor's career. We'll hear more on that now from our national reporter Paul Hawkins, who looks at the background to the case.
Morning, sir. Another high-profile individual abusing their power, or an innocent man wrongly accused. The trial of Kevin Spacey was always going to generate huge media interest.
The Crown Prosecution Service has authorised 4 charges of sexual assault against Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey relating to 3 men. The Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey has been charged by the Crown Prosecution Service with a further 7 sex offences.
By the end of the trial, Spacey faced 9 counts of sexual offence allegations by 4 different men from 2001 to 2013.
It was at this West End theatre during a charity event in 2005 that one of those men said Spacey grabbed him by his private parts and made lewd comments about him. The man later telling police it was like a cobra. But the Hollywood actor said the man made his entire story up from beginning to end, describing the prosecution case as weak. During the trial, Spacey called himself a big flirt. The prosecution said he was a sexual bully. Another man claimed Spacey drugged him and he woke up in the actor's flat to find the Oscar winner performing a sex act on him. The Hollywood actor denied drugging him and said it was a consensual sexual experience and romantic situation. Central to the prosecution's case was that he used his power and status to carry out the assaults. Many of them included allegations that he grabbed, squeezed and touched his 4 victims' genitals and buttocks over their clothing between 2005 and 2013, mostly during his time as artistic director at the Old Vic Theatre. One accuser claimed Spacey grabbed his genitals on their way to a ball at Elton John's house in 2002. But giving evidence, the singer said the actor attended the White Tie and Tiara event in 2001, the only year he could remember him attending.
Grateful to our fans.
During the trial, the jury heard claim and counterclaim, although Spacey admitted he got the signals wrong with one accuser, but also described a sexual encounter with another as a romantic situation. He said he was lonely at times and found it hard to trust people because of his fame. Before this trial, there'd already been multiple allegations in the United States by men and women, some leading to private prosecutions, about Spacey's behaviour. Allegations he's always denied and private lawsuits he's successfully defended. But the damage to his 40-year career has been considerable. The TV and film projects dried up.
You know, I happen to believe that we get what we deserve.
Netflix dropped him from their hit show House of Cards, successfully suing him for costs incurred totaling $31 million. Spacey still has 2 films, including a British political thriller slated for release this year. And now that he's been acquitted, the question is whether he can rebuild his career to its previous stature. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Well, good afternoon. It's just gone 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. I'm in for Patrick Christie. And of course, we've had this incredible verdict. But coming up in the next hour, the breaking story. Kevin Spacey has been found not guilty on all counts. We'll be covering more of that. And then, of course, Nigel Farage. The debanking scandal goes on. It rumbles on. Of course, Dame Alison Rhodes has resigned. But should she be the only one to go? And as we all know, the wildfires, the big story of raging on through parts of Europe, and they're spreading. We'll be looking at that. Holidays from hell for those who are there. And, of course, Rishi Sunak has been speaking at the Blood Inquiry. We'll be looking into that throughout the show as well and find out what his comments are. All that on the way as Sunak gives evidence. So as ever, get in touch in the usual way. GBviews at gbnews.com or tweet us at GBnews. Also, don't forget, 80 years old, we'll be discussing great rock legend. Who is he? But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Nana. Well, as you've been hearing, breaking news coming to us in the last few minutes, and Kevin Spacey has been found not guilty on all counts of sexual assault. The 64-year-old Oscar-winning actor has been found not guilty of sexually assaulting 4 men. That was in the period